And it happened again, Nick. We
went
live.
live. We went live.
We went live once again for the throngs of those that are interested in watching our tomfoolery for another however long this show takes this time.
They're not interested in us.
Would you be?
No.
No, I wouldn't be, especially not on this episode. We have a much more interesting person joining us. And since there's enough people in here to qualify, we are going to do the intro right now.
Intro time.
Cover to Covered is a podcast that features two idiots talking about music at length, and occasionally a dog does make an appearance. There will also be special guests from time to time that will show up, and they will be smarter than the hosts. And the hosts will give their opinions. By the way, they are exactly that. Opinions. They're not truths, they are not fallacies, and they do not reflect the views or opinions of their employers or those they employ. So with that, just enjoy the damn show. And we're back. Welcome to the show, everybody. My name is Mike Venezia. This is another exciting episode of Cover to Covered. That's Nick Morocco. Nick, what store do you own?
Rock City Music Company.
And where are you located?
5 Mile in Farmington in Livonia, Michigan.
And how can we find you?
RockCityMusicCo.com and all social media platforms.
And what is your favorite type of pizza?
Ooh, pepperoni, of course.
So I need to bring this up really, really quick. So Nick and I ran into Nick in Vegas.
Yep.
And I told Nick the best place to get pizza in Vegas. Now, y'all know I'm a pizza snob, right?
You are from New York.
I'm from New York. I am a pizza snob. I'm a bagel snob. This kind of comes with the territory. This is what I do. So there's a place called Secret Pizza. I've now given the secret away. It's called Secret Pizza. It's at the Cosmopolitan Hotel, and it's open until like 4 or 5 in the morning. And Nick and his friend Goldfish had just come out of a show, and they're like, we're hungry. I'm like, well, I'm going to bed. It's like 12:30 in the morning, whatever. So they're like, where's that pizza place? I'm like, Cosmopolitan. Now, it's called Secret Pizza because it's hidden. I'm not going to tell you how to find it, but it's there. And it's some of the best pizza in the universe. Of course, it's not that much of a secret because the line was out the door forever.
I was going to say it's pretty easy to find.
Yeah. And Nick's like, I don't want to wait in this line for pizza. Blah, blah, blah. I'm like, Nick, it's going to go quick. This line, blah, blah, blah. And we're texting back and forth. And I'm like 20 minutes later, my God, this pizza's incredible. Of course, because all you got to do is wait. All you got to do is wait. And sometimes, Nick, when you're not impatient, you get wins.
Yes. But
and that was a definite win.
As most know, patience is one of my top virtues.
Yeah, it's not in any way, shape, or form.
Nope, none.
Great. So we have a really big show today. Not to quote Ed Sullivan, really big shoe. And we are super excited to have Roger Joseph Manning Jr., sorry, I need to say the whole name, on the show with us today. And we'll talk about why we need to say the whole name when Roger comes on. But before that, we kind of want to see what's going on out there in the field. Like, what's coming out this week, Nick? This way we can set the stage for future purchases for our crowd that is watching right now.
Yes. Okay, so this week you're going to be able to grab finally an official release for Jack White's No Name album. If you remember, he put it out as a surprise, and you had to stand in line at Third Man, and they were $800 a piece on eBay. Then there was a blue vinyl version, which was indie store exclusive, which was, of course, selling out everywhere. But now the official black vinyl is hitting the bins this Friday, so that will be available. I know a lot of people got shut out of the last couple, so you should be able to get this one. Mike, you'll be happy to know Bon Jovi Greatest Hits, first time on vinyl.
Yes, I've been holding my breath.
Did you see he stopped that lady from jumping off a bridge?
Now that I give him a lot of credit for. That's kind of crazy that he actually talked somebody literally off the ledge.
Yes.
That's nuts. So kudos to John Bon Jovi for that one, for helping save a woman's life who was, I guess, down on her luck, and he talked her literally from jumping off a bridge.
Yeah.
So that's just crazy.
Yes. And then finally, Fish, another one of your favorite bands, Fish, reissue of, I believe it's their debut album, Junta, I think is how you say it. Triple black and white splatter vinyl. It hasn't been available in quite a long time. I think they did it for Record Store Day, maybe about 10, 12 years ago, and it was a $300 or $400 record. So now it's finally coming back out.
Is it a triple record that's 45 RPM or is it 33?
I think it's 33.
Wow, those are some long songs, huh?
Yeah, well, I mean, comes with the territory.
Fish. Yeah, I guess. Cool. Well, what are you listening to right now? What's been in rotation for you?
So a couple things. One thing we definitely got to bring up, Mike, is the Black Sabbath Rhino Hi-Fi press.
That sounds so good. So Nick told me about this. He's like, have you gotten this yet? I'm like, I didn't even know it was out. And I got it and I put it on and I'm texting Nick furiously like, this is amazing.
Yeah.
Like it sounds like not in a bad way. It sounds like a modern recording, like a modern version of it, because it's so crisp and clear and doesn't have that, I don't know, a lack of a better term, that patina that I guess the old versions have. When I say old versions, I just mean like old pressings of it. This is crazy. And Nick, as you astutely pointed out, he's like, wait for the drums.
Yeah.
Like the drums just sound incredible. It's fantastic. And the stereo separation is great. And, this is a recording from 1970. Yeah. So, I mean, it sounds absolutely phenomenal. I think they're probably sold out by now.
No, there was a numbered version and then there was an unnumbered version, which of course ruffled a ton of feathers, but it is still available actually. I think it's like $39.99, which is a steal for this level of quality from the packaging all the way down. Yeah,
if you're a Black Sabbath fan at all, you need this in your collection. It's that good.
Yep.
It's hard to imagine that something that far removed from its original recordings could still be made to sound as good as it does.
Yes.
It's crazy good. So yes, 100%. Now that I stole what you're listening to, what else are you listening to?
No, I wanted you to talk about that because we both had it.
Yeah.
That led me to getting the ZZ Top Rhino Hi-Fi box,
you did get it. Okay.
Which is just as good as the Sabbath.
Yep.
Again, from the packaging all the way down. I have to give a shout out to the Stone Temple Pilots Purple Atlantic 75 reissue, which just sounds amazing as well. And of course, to prepare for this interview, I've been going through Roger's entire catalog.
Same.
And his solo album, which I'll show, Land of Pure Imagination from I think 2006 or 7, somewhere in there, which is another masterpiece in a long line of them. I've been spinning the hell out of that, and what a great record.
Yeah, it's Roger is such a talent, and again, we're just super happy to have him on here. With that said, I've been listening to this a lot.
Yes, I just played that as well.
Yep.
I have mine here.
So, see, there's yours. So this is Roger's most recent EP, Radio Daze, and this one also has songs from Glamping, his previous EP on it as well. So make sure that you pick this up on vinyl, on CD, or just listen to it like a billion times on Apple Music or Spotify so he gets paid, because it's only right. We want to make sure that the artists get their due for the music that they make, and Roger's made a lot over the years. So,
yes.
You know what? I think we're talking without him here. I think we need to bring him in, because it's sort of like, it's kind of like talking behind his back, but not really. But, because he's right here.
And it's all good stuff.
So, ladies and gentlemen, our next guest, or our guest, period. We don't have a next one. This is it. Needs no introduction, but he's going to get one. You probably know him from the band Jellyfish, but he's been in a million different projects that he started, like Imperial Drag, the Lickerish Quartet, the Moog Cookbook, Beatnik Beach, his own solo career. He is currently touring with Beck as his keyboard player and has been doing that for a number of years too. And there's stories from that we definitely want to hear. He's a remixer. He's a producer. He's a recorder. He's a singer. He's just everything to everyone.
Yes.
Not to quote Everclear. But ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, Roger Joseph Manning Jr.
Ta-da!
Roger, you don't like keyboards at all, do you?
Can we hurry up so I can go buy this Sabbath reissue?
I'll
You know
send
what?
you one,
You
Roger.
kind of have to. Yeah, it's that good. I mean, not
I
to
didn't know
just
anything
keep.
about it.
Yeah. Well, when Nick told me, I didn't know about it, and when I got it, I hated myself for not knowing about it. And I can only imagine this is going to lead to, Paranoid and other albums down the road coming out in this, real audiophile format. It's phenomenal. So now you're a big fan of vinyl yourself, correct?
I am. I don't really have the leisure time anymore to sit down and play with that collection. But yeah, I mean, my former partner and myself just, half of our dates were in thrift stores. And
Nice.
we would both get excited to like run into a thrift store that we hadn't gone through before and just like walk out with endless vinyl because everything was 50 cents. So
Yeah.
if it sucked, it was like, so what? And we never thought that it would get as out of control as it has. She still has the majority of that collection at her house, and thankfully we're in touch, and I can still drive over and enjoy it if I want, but I'm too busy often.
Do you have like a library card for the collection?
Yeah, basically. But yeah, I didn't have a place to live when we ended our relationship. I didn't have an official place to live, so I put all my stuff in storage. And she's like, yeah, we're not going to spend the time going through the records, are we? Because it's like 3,000 plus. And it's like,
Whoa,
this one
okay.
for you and this one for me. And it's like, no, we want to remain friends. So let's just leave it in one place.
Yeah.
It'll be fine.
No, that's great. Now, you say that you don't have a lot of time. Let's go through why you don't have a whole lot of free time. You are a busy man. So what is it that you are involved with at the moment? I mentioned Beck, but in addition to that, what do you have going on right now? I know you're on the road a lot with him, though.
Yeah, there's been scattered. This hasn't been a particularly busy year for Beck, but we have done something wonderfully unique and special for him, which is that he's been performing in front of an orchestra. So we'll fly into town. We hire the local orchestra. We rehearse with them for 3 hours, literally run the whole 22 song set. They're reading music and everybody's kind of feeling out the situation. And then we perform that night. And thankfully he wanted Jason and myself and Joey to kind of fill out the orchestra, be like the little go-go rock band with the big orchestral sound. And then he's got Jason and I just singing a ton, which is wonderful. Because it's all so different than the rock band version. So it's a whole different body of work. We only play like 2 or 3 hits that have been, radio hits that have been rearranged for orchestra. And he's, lucky to have been born into a family. His father is just an incredible arranger and composer. So he commissioned his dad to do all these incredible arrangements.
Wow. Okay.
That's
We get
great.
to play. Yeah, and he's covering 2 Scott Walker songs, which has just been a dream to be a fan of that music for so long, all of us. I mean, we bonded on that kind of stuff when we met. And then to be sitting there playing my little part, but then hear the 80-piece orchestra get to play those songs every night in 3D is just breathtaking, because those Scott records are some of my favorite stuff from the 60s and early 70s.
Awesome.
Great records. Have you ever played with a live orchestra before? Is this the first time you've done that?
I have, but minimally and in different settings. Of course, in college, there were opportunities to do that, both with like jazz big bands and classical things and choirs. And then scattered things over the years, like film dates and stuff, but it's been the exception for sure. It's not something I do regularly, but it's not foreign to me. So when I found out we were going to do this, it was actually fun for me to read my chart, to follow the conductor, and be in a more kind of like legit non-rock environment, because I realized how much that's a part of me too, and I missed doing that. So I'm glad Beck's brought those worlds together.
That's awesome. Now, speaking of Beck and speaking of you, now you have your name as Roger Manning. You get credited a lot as Roger Joseph Manning Jr. That it is your call to do that. Can you explain why and how that ties into Beck?
Yeah, I've shared this story before for those who've already heard it, but all good. So basically, even before I met Beck, I became aware of this gentleman on the East Coast with the same name, who got signed to SST Records in the 80s. And I was aware that he was part of this kind of neo late 80s folk scene that was a much bigger deal in New York than on the West Coast. Anyway, so when I started having to give credits for anything, I was like, well, I plan on making it in music. And I hope I have as much notoriety, if not more, than this gentleman. So it's such a simple, almost bland name. But I was like, for God's sake, there's actually another guy who's like in my age group, right? It's like, it's one thing if you're John Smith, but I couldn't believe that because Roger was losing fashion. It was less fashionable, the name. Anyway, so I just said, okay, I'll use my full name. And then the funniest part was when I met Beck, as I was getting to know him, and this was a while, I think we were out to lunch one day, and he goes, I'm friends with the other Roger Manning. And I go, wait, what? He goes, yeah. He goes, when I was 18 and I left Los Angeles to go explore my folk stuff and make that scene, Roger Manning was also in the clubs, and he was very friendly. And I slept on the couch, and we were buddies during that whole time. And I don't know to what degree they stayed in touch, but obviously Beck came back to LA only a couple years later. And he goes, what are the odds of me working with the two Roger Mannings in this generation of musicians? It's really bizarre. And so that was endlessly fascinating.
Yeah,
it is what it is.
Well, it just proves that the world is smaller than it actually seems, right? And it all just kind of comes back around. So you guys are meant to work together.
Well, I kid you not, about a year and a half ago, maybe even more recent, somebody who lives on the East Coast and is very involved in kind of like, I don't think he's a musician, but like yourselves, he's just immersed in all the different scenes. He's a collector, enthusiast. He's very passionate about bands past and present that he likes. And I was introduced to him when we played a show in Philadelphia, and I must have given him my contact info. And I was introduced to him. He's a friend of my partner in the Moog Cookbook, Brian Kehew. So that's how I met him. And I'm sorry, his name is slipping my mind at the moment. Anyway, he texts me out of the blue, and he goes, look, the other Roger Manning says hi. And I go, wait, what? And then it dawned on me, well, of course he knows him. They've both been on the East Coast in the scene. Of course he knows him. And he said to say hi, and he would love to make a Roger Manning record someday. if the opportunity should arrive. And I almost fell over. I think I was driving in my car, just checking my text or whatever. And I just had the biggest laugh, because it was like, right. Because like you just said, the world's getting smaller and smaller. Of course, this gentleman knows him, and he ran into him on the street, and blah, blah, blah.
That's amazing.
Incredible.
That's fantastic. Yeah. So with all that said, we have a little bit of background as to what's happening now. Let's go back a little bit, or a lot, depending on who you are. We're all 15 years old, so we can't go back too far, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Nick is younger than me by like 20 years, so I hate him. But
well, that's actually real quick, Mike. Before we start that, I had a ton of people no, I had a ton of people asking, as I was sharing and promoting that we were going to have Roger on, and people were saying, how did you guys manage to do this? How did you make contact with Roger? And I figured this would be a good time to share that story. So around, I think I was about 12 or 13. I had grown up hearing the Jellyfish records because my dad and my uncle were huge fans, and for a long time, when my dad first got Spilt Milk, he played it on like an endless loop for it seemed like an eternity, because you know when you're young that you don't really have the scope of time. But as I got older, you know, it like I was playing it on an endless loop. And around the time of like MySpace, you know, when social media was really taking off, I found Roger on MySpace, who was promoting his solo record at the time, and I wrote to him and I said, you know, your music is so influential to me, and I would love to get you to sign my copy of Spilt Milk. And Roger wrote me back, and I remember like telling my buddies, like, oh my God, Roger from Jellyfish sent me a message. And Roger was cool enough to say, yes, send it along and I'll be happy to sign it for you. And of course I sent like 10 CD booklets and then my Imperial Drag record and a poster, everything. But Roger was cool enough to sign all of it and send it back to me. And we've stayed in touch ever since then. So that's how we were able to do this, because Roger and I became friends over this. And I just always thought it was so cool that you did that, because you could have easily been like, I'm not signing this guy's shit, sending it all the way over here.
I was back then, and even now, I'm just so amazed and impressed when people rediscover us, you know, or particularly if they're from a younger generation, or anything that I've done. It's one thing when like an old tried and true Jellyfish fan wants to hear more music, and so they hunt out what are the former members up to, you know. But people like yourself, whose parents introduced them or whatever, and it's just the coolest.
You know, it's interesting that you put it in that way, because it's kind of funny, you know, and we'll talk about this as the show progresses. But you know, when you say that people look to see what the other members of Jellyfish are doing at this point, you all wind up coming together. It seems throughout the years, you've always sort of like, all right, we're doing and we'll come back and we'll come back in this configuration. We came back in this configuration, come back in this configuration. And it's always awesome.
Yes.
All right. So, and we're going to talk about all this, but it all started way back when you were born. That's usually the beginning is a good place to start. And you're originally from Northern California, right?
LA.
Did you go to high school in Northern California?
Yeah.
Oh,
I'm Angelino.
Okay.
My mother was from Hawthorne. My dad's from Burbank, and we would have grown up here, but my dad got transferred when I was 5.
That would make you an Angelino for sure.
Yeah, and so we grew up in this small suburb of San Francisco, in the Bay Area, called Pleasanton.
And what was those formative years when you were up there? Obviously, LA has its own mystique and aura to it, but growing up outside of it in those sort of formative years, I'm sure had an influence on you as well. Like, how did that affect your direction in music, if you had to think about that?
Well, you know, the Bay Area has always been a serious music force. I mean, up until recently, really, the last 20 years, it's dried up. But I grew up in the ripple in the wake of the immense influence that city had, of course, in the 60s and 70s. And but we were removed from it way out. I mean, we were past Berkeley. I mean, where I grew up, when we moved there, it looked like it might as well have been like a small town in Nebraska.
Oh boy.
So in some ways it was idyllic. You could, you know, skateboard and ride your bike around dirt areas and build forts and not wear helmets and not wear knee pads and get banged up and ruffle tumble, play in the dirt, come home with dirt underneath your fingernails. That's all important. I look back on that now and realize how blessed I was to be in that environment. But I was banging on the usual pots and pans and boxes like you hear about a lot of kids. And my parents were like, well, he seems to have some musical affinity. let's try to give him music lessons. And all I want to do is play the drums, which my uncle did. It was just very natural. I don't even know where that came from. And my parents were smart enough to go, well, we're going to pay for lessons. He should learn some harmony. So that means, in addition to rhythm. So that means guitar or piano. And there were no guitars in the house. My parents are not musical. And my grandparents happened to be getting rid of a spinet piano they had. They were going to give it to a thrift store. And they're like, well, we'll just give it to you guys if the kids want to mess around with it. And we moved into this neighborhood, and there was a Mormon family who lived down the street, and they had like 12 kids, and one of the daughters was teaching piano lessons to the little kids in the neighborhood. And my mom just said, you're going over here. And I'm like, are there drums? No. Well, then why am I doing this? But I liked banging on the piano. That was fine with me. But really, truth be told, this piano teacher who was 16 and all of her sisters, young and old, there were like 2 boys in the family and the rest were girls. Poor father. They were all gorgeous. So I was just like, I'll do whatever you say for you piano teacher. And I'd show up at the house and I'd be there with my little piano books and my little Leave It to Beaver haircut. And they'd be like, oh, Roger's here. Oh my goodness. They'd come and they'd like pinch me on the cheeks and give me hugs and everything. I'm like, this is win-win.
Oh yeah. It sounds like heaven.
Yeah. They had one of the first pools in the neighborhood. I didn't know anybody who had a swimming pool. So I'd go over there. And all the sisters and everybody's playing in the pool. It was like a go-go beach party in the backyard. It's like, I'll just hang out here. And piano was just something that was going to be part of going to their house. But they all were more of a generation older, right? So like I remember the older brother had like Chicago records and music that I didn't know about, and Crosby, Stills and Nash and things. So I almost quit piano lessons like 2 or 3 times, and I switched teachers because the Mormon family actually moved, unfortunately. But I almost quit piano in 1972. I'll never forget. But the movie The Entertainer had just come out. The Sting had just come out with the Scott Joplin score.
Yes.
And by some miracle of pop culture back then, very different than now, you had instrumentals that could actually be in the top 10.
Yeah.
And that Scott Joplin song was getting a reboot. I was like, what's that? Because it's all piano. I can hear that. But I'm hearing harmony and melody that were so foreign to my classically trained ears, right? Because typical piano lessons back then, of course, was just like classical literature, which is great for reading. They teach you to read from day one. And I didn't find it particularly difficult. I never practiced. It was very straightforward to me. And I basically would play the piano to get attention from everybody at Christmas, or like I said, the Mormon girls. But I didn't care. I wanted to play drums. And there was a little like Mickey Mouse drum set. Literally, it had like the Disneyland characters on it that Santa showed up one year for me. And I broke that within 3 days because you put your sticks through the drum heads and there's no way to replace them.
Yeah.
I was like, what? Come on, what's going on? But I was very excited to have it. And but I didn't quit piano because the piano teacher was smart enough to go find, they had a downsized rendition, a rearrangement that was more simple for The Entertainer and some of those Scott Joplin songs. So I stayed with piano lessons. And then my uncle was getting rid of his, I kid you not, Ringo abalone shell 5-piece Ludwig kit. He'd been touring with it, playing the clubs with it, and it was beat up. But he said, well, why don't I just sell it to Roger and the family for almost free. So, but he had to keep his cymbals. So I had a real drum set now. This was in 6th grade. And I had to go find cymbals. I didn't know anything about cymbals. So I went to the local music store and they're like, well, here's a crash. And I go, what are the ones that go like this? These are hi-hats. Okay.
Nick's a drummer and he still calls it that.
Yeah.
Things
I
that
still
go like this.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So now I had a real drum set and 2 things happened. Well, I had taken some basic drum lessons in elementary school, which I could do because I could read. So that was fun to it was just more reading practice. But they didn't have drum sets. You had to play on these practice pads and maybe a snare drum if you were lucky. So now I had a real drum set, and I had seen everybody on TV do the cross stick. Right? I didn't know anything about technique, and I was taking piano lessons. So it didn't occur to me, well, you should take drum lessons. It's like, no, my parents are already paying for piano lessons. Who knows what I was thinking back then as a kid? But I would, in addition to like coming home from school and going outside and playing kickball or football with your friends or skateboarding, I would run upstairs if I felt inspired to go play with the radio for 30 minutes before mom called us all down for dinner. Now, by some miracle, my family allowed me to play this very, very loud drum set. My door was closed, for hours while my brothers are trying to do homework. My dad's getting home from work. He's probably tired and exhausted and pissed off. And right. My mom was a school teacher. She was prepping dinner, and I'm upstairs like, it sounds like somebody's falling down a staircase. And I would turn on KFRC, which is the top 40 station in the Bay Area. Everybody knows it who grew up there. And they would just play the hit parade all day long. And as you guys remember, it's a rock track, a funk track, a disco track, a new wave track. It was just an instrumental. Here's Billy Joel. Here's Skinner. Here's Zeppelin. Stairway to Heaven for the 10th time today. Well, on and on and on. Oh, here's this new guy, Peter Frampton. Blah, blah. Here's the new Elton John song. And I would just play along. Had no freaking clue what I was doing. I was trying to, and it just kind of started to seep in. I understood, well, you're playing rhythm, you're playing time, like you're playing a groove. Well, now the song is expanding. So maybe you go to the ride cymbal, give it more energy. And then you do a little transition, because you would just imitate what you were hearing. And that's how I learned to play drums. Now, the best part about this, because I never claimed to be an amazing drummer or anything, but my time and sense of rhythm and independence just shot through the roof. Because they typically, with traditional piano lessons, they don't teach you that. So I was kind of jumping into the deep end of the pool, and and then you start hearing about groups like Steely Dan and Toto and Rush and things that are more intricate, even Chicago or whatever. So I'm hearing stuff in odd time. I'm hearing instruments and rhythmic feels and things that were new to me. That weren't just like the straight ahead Earth, Wind and Fire funk or the straight ahead AC/DC rock or whatever, right? So I almost quit piano lessons again because I was so into the drums. And then I don't know where you guys grew up, but on the West Coast, they had this store in the malls, right? Oh, mom's taking us to the mall. Yay, it's like going to Disneyland. She's off shopping for bed sheets or something we need, and we're wandering the store by ourselves. And there's a store called Musicland. And in the front of it was a very deep store. In the front of Musicland, they had all the vinyl and cassettes. Here's the latest Hall & Oates, and it's discounted. So everybody's at the front of the store looking at the top 40, right? I would wander to the back of the store as I started to lose interest in more of what everybody else was into. Started discovering, well, what's kind of speaking to me? And I would wander to the back of the store. That's where the jazz was. That's where the progressive rock was. All the weird shit that wasn't selling. What's this Blue Oyster Cult? I was like, and this store had sheet music. It had a whole wall of sheet music, primarily so that guitar players could grab the hits and play the tablature, right, from like Beatles songs and what have you. But not only did they have like Beatles songbooks and things, but they, right, whatever the top 40 was, they would try to let's cash in on that. So I discovered that not only did they have Kiss music, I love that, and I was totally into Kiss because I was the right age to be into Kiss, along with Sabbath and Zeppelin and all that stuff. But they had tons of music by bands like Chicago. And you'll appreciate this story. I don't want to spend too much time on my youth here, but it's very colorful. It's
great.
Fun. It's fun. The Columbia House Record Club, if you guys remember that.
Oh, yes. Yeah. I got into a lot of trouble with those as a kid.
I still owe them money.
Same. So I convinced my parents, because my parents knew that it was a scam. So, but I kept begging them because I couldn't believe you could get all this stuff for like $1.50 or whatever it was, right? And they're like, okay, we'll. I didn't have any money. I would barely had a paper out. We'll give you the $1.50 if you. I said, Mom, you can order some stuff too, because I couldn't even imagine ordering more than like 5 records.
Yeah,
that was going to be Christmas times 10. So my mom wanted to get Chicago's greatest hits. Stevie Wonder record. I'm like, okay, fine. I'm going to get all my Kiss albums and, whatever. So, of course, Columbia House screwed up the order. I waited like 2 months for it. It seemed like an eternity. They screwed up the order. They didn't give me some of my Kiss records and gave me like 4 Chicago albums that nobody asked for. And so I was like, well, Chicago's greatest hits, I like and I know. It has all the songs we grew up with, right? But here are these albums I've never seen. I don't know what's on them. They've got B-sides, right? They've got non-hits. And this fascinated me. And it didn't occur to me at all that I could put those back in a box and send them back and go, you screwed up my order. Now fix it. This is what I ordered. No, I'm stuck with it. They screwed it up. I guess it's just the way it goes. But what that allowed me to do was get into the fact that there were rock bands out there, because I was a rock kid. I was the perfect demographic, but that you could stretch it out. You could take rock all kinds of places. In the case of a band like Chicago, they were hearkening to the jazz that they grew up with and incorporating it into their rock foundation and the music they wanted to write. So I'm hearing brass arrangements and these intricate, potentially dissonant harmonies. They were advanced rhythmically compared to a lot of rock, and also synthesizers and electric keyboards start making their way into the sound palette for arranging and decorating. And I'm hearing synthesizers for the first. I'm like, what's going on? And then I would go to my piano teacher's house, and she had a stack of keyboard magazine. And so while I'm waiting for my lesson, I would start leafing through her magazine. I'm like, what are these keyboards with knobs and wires attached?
Yeah.
What the hell is going on? Because there was no way for me to, aside from the occasional group on television or something, there was no way. I had no reference point for this. There was no way for me to get access to this stuff. So I would see like people like Rick Wakeman on the cover of Keyboard magazine with his cape and his long hair and the lights and the 2 mini Moogs he's playing in this Mellotron. I didn't know what any of this stuff was. So I started becoming intrigued, like, oh, that's keyboards? Well, I play that, but there's some different sounds happening. So that's literally what happened. I was going to quit again and just concentrate on drums. And then I discovered I could buy the Chicago sheet music, and I taught myself chords because it said C, C-M-I-N. And then I could see there was a little thing for the guitar, but what did that mean? So I could read, right? So I'd figure out what those first things were that the arranger had done for the Chicago sheet music. I'd go, this must be a C minor. And when I played along with just, triadic stuff, and then when I'd try to play along with the record, and I literally would fumble through it and go, this is working. Oh, that's a disaster. What did I do? What's wrong? What don't I understand? But I couldn't take it to my piano teacher because she didn't know this world. So it was really by myself. And then when I got to be a freshman, these 2 junior highs merged into my high school. And that was the greatest blessing for me ever, because the other junior high from across town that came to my high school had a much more advanced junior high music program with a very young and hip teacher. And this teacher really encouraged some of these other kids to get into jazz rock type stuff. So these kids came to this high school now, and I was always used to being like the most talented guy in school. Not anymore. There were 2 other keyboard players who were quite advanced with chordal stuff and rock and things. No shortage of amazing drummers. So I was like, oh God, I'm not going to play drums in front of these guys. They're amazing. And just, older kids who were just hip to things like, Rush Hemispheres. and some of them are listening to like ska and new wave and punk. And others are like, on and on and on. Others had actually like seen Led Zeppelin. They'd actually seen these bands live and stuff. And I was having my mind blown. And the best part was, again, in kind of junior high, elementary school, junior high, I had no problem admitting that I was in love with the ladies. And it was just, hey, you want to go to the dance? Sure. You look like Scott Baio. Sure. Let's go to the dance. Hey, can I hold you for a slow dance? Sure. You look like Scott Baio. Let's do it. Right. It was just like smooth sailing.
So Chachi was big in your high school?
Yeah. Chachi was big in my high school. And we get to high school, and everybody's hit puberty except me. So now the girls that would have been looking at me and they got their eyes on the other guys who are, their shoulders are getting their whiskers or on the football team. But so I was like, what's happening? This isn't cool. But it all worked out, because I now had this other like family to engage with that was all about, I could kind of take my high school puberty woes and harness them in a positive way into all this music I was hearing for the first time. I mean, somebody introducing me to Zappa was like, dear God.
Yeah.
And that was sometime around Joe's Garage era, and the missing persons people that come out. I mean, it was just endless. And the older kids who could drive would go into Berkeley. They'd go into the city. They would buy records. They would come back. And at lunchtime in the band room, we couldn't hang out with the cool kids because they didn't want us to hang out with them. They just throw shit at us and call us names. We got to hang out in the band room where there was a turntable, and we could eat our lunch in there and spin records. Nice. And somebody would be like, I just found this. It's got this drummer from England. He's really young. His name is Simon Phillips, and he's playing on a Jeff Beck record. And we'd all go, who's this Jan Hammer guy playing keyboard? And our minds would be like, what is this? It's kind of rock, but it's also really groovy. There's a ton of electronics happening, and I'm hearing rhythms and stuff that's making no sense, but it's very stimulating, really just hooking our attention. And again, that'd be one thing if I was on my own, but I had a reinforcement. I had an infrastructure with this family of nerds. We were all like discovering this stuff together. The Police are happening, and we're like, whoa, here's a crazy, weird sound. And you can kind of tell that there's some musicians in this band. They're not just some dumb, unschooled punk rock guys who I also like, but the musician in me was being titillated by, you could kind of tell your kind of thing. And it was just, so then I went full blown into keyboards. Now, by some miracle, this podunk town that I grew up in, this high school had a Rhodes electric piano and a mini Moog synthesizer. I don't know how they acquired that, how they got the school to pay for this, but they did. And me and my young friend could not play it unless we got in the A jazz band. So we had to play in the B jazz band that didn't have those keyboards. And the worst part is that the band instructor said, if you guys want to play in the jazz band, you have to do marching band. We're like, fuck you. What? No. We're already nerdy enough. We don't want people to throw more stuff at us. And he goes, that's the rules. So my friend, who, he was average build, average height, he's like, well, I'll just go play, because all the cool kids, if they were cool nerds, they were in the drum corps, right? So my friend goes, well, I'll go hang out with them, all the cool drummers. And they would put the marching marimba on him. And he could already play keyboard. So he did marching marimba. And I was like, cool, I'll play marching marimba. And they came over and they put it on me, and I fell over. Because it hit my knees, right?
Oh,
it's like a big thing. It's like,
yeah.
I thought, it's not going to be heavy. Whoop. So the instructor goes, well, you read C clef, right, from piano? I go, absolutely. He goes, you're playing trombone, because he knew I could read C. He didn't have to teach me B clef or E flat, like the winds and the brass.
And you're like, there's no trombone on Police records, man.
No. There was trombone on Chicago records.
Yes.
No, it couldn't be more nerdy. But again, some musical guardian angel was looking out for me. The trombone squad was about 5 or 6 gentlemen. And these guys were really cool older kids. They knew what we were doing was nerdy as hell, and they didn't give a shit. They're like, we're going to do this, and we're going to do it with pride, and we're going to hang. And these guys got me into so much music that I didn't know about. So I had my little nerd squad within the nerd squad. And
sub nerd squad.
Yeah, sub nerd squad. And so one of the guys, so imagine that one of the guys is getting me into like Yes and Genesis and Rush. And the other guy who's kind of like, my older brothers were into all that hippie rock. I'm into the new wave ska sound. So he was getting me into like Madness and the Police and like Wall of Voodoo and early punk like Dead Kennedys and stuff. I'm like, so I'm having my mind blown. This is like nothing was I listening to that was like this stuff. And so my appetite was whet. And then so 4 years of high school was just like the whole objective in the 4 years of high school, in addition to trying to get the girls to notice you, was discover and listen to as much music as possible and try to become as proficient on your instrument as humanly possible. Why? Because it just felt good to do that. All of us learned right away, the more we applied ourselves, the bigger the return was. We were like developing this superpower. I mean, my keyboard friend, Mike Fisher, bless his heart, I was still taking traditional classical lessons, and he had found this like hip young guy who was kind of teaching him jazz and rock stuff. So like voicings and things that a rock keyboard player needs to know, pop, whatever. Like if you're gonna be a wedding band, right? You need to know this shit. And he would come to school one morning, and at lunch he'd go, "Look, check out this Tony Banks solo from Genesis that I learned." And he'd play it for me, almost note for note, or at least, half of it. And I'd be like, "Wait, what? How did you learn that? How did you?" He goes, "I put the record on, I sat down, and my teacher kind of showed me some stuff." And then I'm like, "Oh my God." So I'd go home, and then I'd try to figure out 10 bars to like a Herbie Hancock solo or something, or something to impress him. And I'd come back and go, "Oh, well, look what I learned." And this went on for like months and months. So we had this really healthy competitive thing that was happening between the two of us.
That was a lot going on there in high school.
Yeah, I was very blessed. And again, this was a working class community. Yes, I can't believe how much art we explored within that setting. And that basically takes me through high school. We can stop there for a second or whatever. But the thing I wanted to leave you guys with was the sole objective was to master your instrument and to learn to improvise and have spontaneity on your instrument, command of that instrument.
Yep.
It was never talked about or never discussed. It was never brought up. What about writing original music? It was we're playing other people's music and improvising on top of it, which is more of a jazz tradition.
So from there, though, like all those things come into formulating songwriting, because once you're mastering songs and mastering your instrument, you're now sort of through osmosis learning the art of songwriting, because you're finding a flow. You're finding this, whether it's verse A, verse B, chorus, bridge, chorus, verse C, chorus out, or whatever it is, from playing all these different songs, especially since you were working with no confines, like you're talking about everything from Zappa to the Dead Kennedys. I mean,
well, that's
everything
what stuck
within
out to me is like it knowing that you were so open with that and had all of those influences. It makes a whole lot of sense when you look at your catalog that there's stuff from synth pop all the way to Beach Boy harmonies and heavy rock and all of it, because you were taking all of that in and processing it. And I think a lot of musicians, they find their niche, and they might like other stuff, but this is what I do. And it was all coming to you fresh.
Again, I was very lucky with this kind of group, because we all kind of understood very soon, with all the used music shopping we did in Berkeley, right? So that time on Telegraph Avenue in downtown Berkeley, right by the campus, there were 5 to 6 vinyl stores within walking distance of each other. And we would each go with about $20 to Berkeley. We saved up as much money as we could that week. And my friend would buy, so for $20, you could get, if there were 50 cents each, or let's call it dollar vinyl, right? So he'd get $1, 20 records. I'd get 20 records. And we'd try to buy different ones, because then we just go home and swap them and tape each other's stuff. So we would have piles of music to listen to. And yes, maybe we want to get a new release. The new Peter Gabriel had just come out, but it was also like, but I like this one Yes song. And you'd come home with 5 Yes records. You may hate all of them, but it was worth taking the gamble.
And that was at a time when you would listen to the whole album, like you mentioned, the B-sides, all these other tracks, and because you spent X amount of money on it, like, well, I like the one song, and I'm going to get my money's worth out of it and listen to this whole darn thing. Yeah. And then you're putting it on repeat, because
so we learned right away, because it was, Madonna was coming out, and Prince, there were contemporary things, both from England and what their kind of second British invasion, but just also, I mean, you couldn't escape the top 40. It was always kind of in your face, whether you liked it or not. But we discovered right away, I guess, looking for the craftsmanship and stuff, that we had this little rule. It was like, look, 5% of every genre is amazing. So people, that was in it. We were coming out of a time where people were bashing disco, and understandably so. But we always were like, no. There's like 5% of disco that's awesome, and you'd like try to turn them on to like why Chic records were better than whatever else, because it just became so cookie cutter. I mean, Kiss was even doing disco records at the time, so formulaic and commercial. But so we tried to remain like open-minded, because it was like, we knew that we're going to try to discover what that cream of the crop was in every genre, because we would usually get really satisfied and have our minds opened, and tracing studio musicians, both British and American, and following that. Oh, I like this guy's drumming. Well, look at these 10 different records he's played on, and they're all really different. He's not just playing like on jazz rock records. And so that's how you would also discover other music that might not have come across your doorstep. But I remember when that first Madonna record came out, there were some other kids who were kind of like, had their nose turned up and like, no, she's like a whiny pop star. And my friend and I were like, this is some of the best like funk keyboard programming and drum machine programming and just synthesizer sound design. We were really getting into early samplers, early polyphonic synthesis, and developing like tastes. And so you had people like Peter Gabriel and Tears for Fears who were really pushing the envelope in those realms. And then you kind of had like this kind of urban American experimental side. Like I said, Madonna, Prince, were doing things that were just more fascinating. We tried to like glom on to who was really trying to push the envelope. And as you guys know, back then, man, yes, there was a lot of homogenous commercialism, but you had like college rock. You could have bands like the Pretenders, Blondie, Devo. I mean, they could have careers without being like in the top 40 or being top 40 adjacent. They could do just great business still. And Talking Heads, blah blah blah. So that was a lot of stuff that was stimulating us, and then trying to go back, like rediscovering the 60s for me, even though I was born into it. But then as I grew up, my generation was kind of like, oh, that's passe, and those long hairs don't, they kind of had their just stoner sound, and it was this one dimension. You just put it into a one-dimensional box so you can understand it. But then to go back and rediscover the huge diversity of what like 1963 to 1973 looks like it's crazy. But you have to sit down and be patient and want to explore that.
There's so many subdivisions within all the decades, if you will, and even within the subdivisions, like you had your sub nerd group, it's very much like that with music in general. But, you obviously set out and had a mission, whether or not you thought of it consciously during high school, to master your instrument, absorb as much as you could, and you become a product of all your influences throughout all that time. Now, during that time, that's when you met Andy as well, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
He was one of the drummers. He was one of the drummers that came over from the other junior high.
There you go. And we're talking about Andy Sturmer from Jellyfish. Eventually, that became Jellyfish after Beatnik Beach, for that matter. But now, after high school, you went to USC, and you went for music, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Now, I do have a kind of a nerdy question. Like, did you choose USC strictly because of their music program, or because of the proximity being in the middle of LA, or was it a little bit of both? Like, what was the allure of that particular college's music program that brought you there?
Well, it was more the latter. It was more a locale thing. I submitted to all the main music schools at the time, from Berkeley to North Texas State to Miami, and I think I got accepted. I got accepted to everyone except Eastman, which was
Oh.
Eastman was a big deal school at the time.
Yeah.
And this was going to be for jazz focus because I knew I wanted. No one was going to keep me out of a career in music. However, I had no idea what that was going to look like. I literally had no, what do I find the most rewarding and what's going to pay my bills, and I had no idea what that was. So I had the luxury of going to college, like a lot of kids, to figure out, well, what is that going to be? You basically got 3 or 4 years to figure out what that's going to look like. So I knew it was going to be a music school, and I'm West Coast all the way. It's just like my roots and everything, my history. I've done everything from camp in this state to learn to skateboard in this state, which was one of my passions growing up, and just whatever the West Coast music cultures were, past and present. The East Coast, while it dominated the jazz world for decades, it might as well have been Europe to me. I had no family there. I had no roots there. It was a different climate. It looked different. It looked more European. It just weirded me out. I couldn't relate to it. Other than, well, if you're going to make it in jazz, you got to go do your time in Manhattan, or what have you. And but LA, I would still visit every summer because that's where my grandparents were. So LA was still like where just everything to me as a kid was like moving and shaking. It had the Hollywood machine, and it had everything from the most commercial to the most underground too. Because like all of my American hardcore favorite skate rock bands are all from, so many of them are from Southern California and that whole scene and everything. So in the mid 80s, as punk rock is dying, this new kind of scene and world is emerging out of those ashes. And I knew that LA was an epicenter of that. But San Francisco had it as well. It was a very artistic community. So I just wanted to be in the middle of a creative environment. And Los Angeles had everything from jazz to punk. It had a vivacious nightclub, arty music scene, experimental music scene, but also that's where all the film composers were. So in Los Angeles, I had endless examples of people who were making it in music in a variety of ways. Recording arts. For all I knew, I was going to be into recording arts. I knew nothing about that world, but it fascinated me. So LA seemed like a logical place to be. And there was no other school that I was aware of at the time that was well-rounded. The music school at SC, certainly the jazz and electronic, was it's in its infancy, which was kind of a bummer, but they definitely had a great composer school and traditional music school. And really, it was just a matter of, it just made the most sense. Ultimately, I actually would not advise aspiring musicians to go to music school. But because I didn't know what I wanted to do at all, it made sense.
So did it work for you though? Like in the end, I know that you say you wouldn't necessarily recommend it, but what did you take out of it that you found invaluable that you're still applying today? Or was there anything?
There were some things, but it was minimal. And what those things were a lot of the requirements, like theory classes, basics of composition, basics of arranging, things like that, where it was a nice kind of blanket education in areas that I don't know how else I would have been exposed to them. They're great starter courses, for example, right? So if I fantasized about, I want to arrange a string section like George Martin for an original piece of rock and roll, I didn't have a starting point for that. But at SC, there were classes that allowed me to have a starting point. I'd never sat in front of a violin before, or a violin player. So you just start immersing yourself and having that familiarity. There were, well, also, and this is an upside for any college education, within the first month, 90% of my friends because I didn't know anybody going there, 90% of my acquaintances and friend networks were all film school students.
Huh.
And that was because I found them, frankly, more interesting. They were just more artistic, weird people. all the crazy rager parties with psychedelics and everything were all these film guys who had rented these beat up Victorian houses by the campus, and they would just have tripper parties for like all weekend. And I was talk about hearing music I'd never heard before. These guys were into all kinds of stuff, and then like the whole visual art side of things. And so of course I had musician friends, but they were just more kind of predictable and more safe. So a lot of those film students introduced me to all of the incredible artistic dimensions of different scenes in Los Angeles. Like downtown was having this incredible rebirth at the time in these dingy little bars and warehouses and hotels from the 30s and 40s that were the glamour of Hollywood, but had since fallen apart, were almost, they all went bankrupt, but the buildings were still there. So people would go in and rent the ballroom for the weekend for almost no money and have a 6-band festival. And that's how you'd see like new up and coming music bands that were touring the country. Here's $5 and I'm going to go see Camper Van Beethoven and Rain Parade and Wednesday Week and Downy Mildew and early Jane's Addiction, early Chili Peppers, early Fishbone. I mean, it goes on and on because some of those bands, of course, made it out of those scenes to become famous. But I loved being exposed to the same thing would have happened in New York. But again, I wasn't interested in the East Coast. So in LA, you had your own kind of parallel scene. And it was very much used like the sky's the limit. Anything goes. Because British and American punk opened the door and said, all bets are off. You can do anything you want. And that's the point. You don't have to listen to what corporate America is trying to shove down your throat. You can completely be self-expressive on your own terms. And jazz had always invited that, but part of the joy of jazz is you willingly play within certain parameters. Now you take those boundaries and push them as far out as you want, but you're still within a arena, a vocabulary. Well, the music that I was discovering in the scene was like, there was so much visual art and literature and performance art coming together with music. And half my musical heroes at that time I was discovering were more conceptual artists. These people couldn't play their way out of a paper bag. And that's what was exciting, because they were creating sounds based on their limitations. The guitar players I was into at the time were not Berkeley grads. I mean, I loved Mike Stern and a lot of the jazzers that were coming out of the school, but that's not what was inspiring me. These people who like picked up a guitar 2 years later because they knew they wanted to do some weird art post-punk band, but there was no guitar playing. They'd be like, all right, well, I'll guess I'll teach myself guitar and figure it out. But they had concepts, they had intention, they had ideas, and it's the ideas that were fresh and exciting to me. I'm like, where are they getting their ideas? Because I was used to mimicking other people's ideas. You got right. You mimic your greats.
Yep.
Certainly in the jazz rock community, and that's all just fine. There's no one way to get to the finish line, but that's what was happening in LA in the mid '80s. And so all this is to say, I have all this training and whatever it is, right or wrong, a lot of eggs in this basket, none in this basket. But I was starting to individuate. I was starting to understand, well, what do I want to say? And is that going to be by myself or in combination with other people who have something similar to say? And is it going to be very muso and for artsy fartsy musicians only? Or is there an entertaining aspect? Is there a theater aspect? Are we going to be entertainers? Just ideas I'd never thought about before, right? You see Sting shredding away on the bass and singing, and it's so effortless, but you forget he's got a sound. He's got a look. He's part of a movement. They were making early videos, which is a new art form. Somewhere along the line, he's been inspired in terms of literature and poetry to write lyrics. I don't fuck lyrics. I'm not doing that. I'm not interested. I've never sat down with a poetry book in my life, So it was really important for me to get away from home, get away from my safety friend zone, and literally kind of go into the deep end where I didn't know anybody, but I knew I was going to run into art.
Amazing.
That's fantastic. So, again, a lot. Just first of all, I don't find any passion in anything you're saying at all.
Yeah, right.
This is like I'm just like sitting here going. I want to learn everything again. I want to do it over again.
Yeah,
I want to do it the way he did it.
Right. That first time self-discovery, there's nothing like it. We all
amazing.
remember, right? And there's a childlike immediacy with it. If your friend brings over 10 albums, or you got to check this out, man.
Yeah.
It either hits you right away and resonates, and you're like, more, or you're like, I'm not feeling it.
Yeah.
And we're not, if you've got your friend group, you're not afraid to go. I mean, typically you're not afraid to go, I don't know. That's not, no. I dig this over here or whatever. And those moments where you really identify, right? You're accumulating all these things that are basically your banner. They're your t-shirt. Like, this is who I am. I'm a combination of Todd Rundgren, meet some Jimmy Page, meet some Elton John, meet some Chick Corea, meet some Jello Biafra, meet some Slayer, whatever it is. And
that's about right for me. That's about right.
And well, that's been one of the, ever since Jellyfish founded, and then as you guys know from the different things I've been involved in, they're all avenues to kind of share and showcase these different aspects of my personality, or in the case of collaborative works, cumulative personalities. And it's really about, I'm just reflecting back to the audience what not only inspired me and made me want to commit to songwriting and music back then, but it still does. I mean, the 10, I'd have to think about it and write them down, but the 10 main albums, artists, songs that inspired me to do what I want to do, it kind of hasn't changed. Of course, there's new ones, but it's not like I kicked anybody off the list. Yeah, it's still like, oh my God, how does he do that? Or whatever.
The reason you started is always the reason you started.
Yeah.
So now, with that said, now you came out of college, you made your way back up to Northern California.
So it was another random chain of events during high school. Well, so I should back up. So when my buddies and I were seniors in high school, Andy had graduated before us. He was a year ahead of us. He did not go to music school. He decided to he always told us, he goes, I have a personal goal of being on the cover of Modern Drummer magazine before I'm 21. And me and my friends were like, yep, because you're that good. We're from a small town. Nobody knows who you are, but you're that good. So, and you practice all day long. So if anybody can do that and make that bold of a claim, it's you. We believe you. We believe you. So we're finishing our senior year. We knew he was at home. He was probably working some day job or something. I don't remember. But we knew he was working on music and he was practicing a lot because he was going to be on the cover of Modern Drummer. Well, what we didn't know is that the songwriting bug had bitten him, the first amongst all of our friends. And he was at home also playing with his dad's 4-track reel-to-reel tape recorder and experimenting with song ideas. And so one day he came to visit us. He lived very close to high school, so he could just walk over. And he came to visit us during, our music lunch hour and hang out with us. And what are you doing? What are you working on? Oh, here, let me play something for you. And he starts playing. And he goes, I wrote this kind of song idea. Oh, cool. Because, we're all starting to kind of like think about that, but he was thinking about it first. And so we're listening, me and my friend, I'll never forget me and my friend going, wow, this is really cool. It kind of sounds like a Missing Persons kind of feel. And he had done it all by himself with some piano parts, obviously drum parts. And I think there was like a strumming guitar. I don't remember. Oh, there was drum machine on there also. And it was very kind of Tears for Fears when we were super into like this self-contained electronics doing everything, kind of limitations, but also great experimental aspect because of that. And my friend goes, oh, that's really cool. I like the melody. Who did you find to sing? And he goes, well, no, that's me. And my friend goes, no, it's not. Shut up. That's not you. He goes, yeah, that's me singing. And me and my friend are going, he sounds like Sting. Like, how is this happening? You've never sang a note in your life. Well, you didn't tell us you could sing. Well, I had to put the melody on there, so I just sang. And we're like, wait, what? Which means you had to write the lyrics too to sing. Yeah, that's right. We're like, no, you're supposed to be practicing drums so you can be the next Simon Phillips, Terry Bozzio. You're not supposed to be like writing songs. That's not making any sense. Overnight, that inspired particularly my friend, not necessarily me, to explore this mystery of original songwriting. Now, so I went off to college a few months later, and both my friend and Andy stayed in the Bay Area and basically started playing in local bands and developing projects. My friend was in a pretty successful Bay Area band at the time. Anyway, I go to, Jazzland and whatever in USC, but Andy and I kept sharing mixtapes before they were called mixtapes. And it was literally, this is what I'm listening to now. And there were two super hip film guys that were my roommates. And this one guy was obsessed with all this new music coming out of Australia. And then it was just wonderful underground stuff. And we were starting to discover thrift stores. So we would discover like Monkees records and going, remember these clowns? And one of my friends would go, yeah, but that one song's kind of cool. What? The Monkees aren't cool. No, you should check this out. Okay. And then I get a mixtape from Andy, and he sends me some Monkees songs. And it's like this weird, like long distance thing that's happening. And then I'm sending him like Cocteau Twins from England. And I'm getting into all this Anglo music and early REM and stuff. And he'd send me back, whatever. It just went on and on. So that's how we stayed in touch. Sometimes it was frequently, sometimes it wasn't, but we stayed in touch. So my junior year of college, I'd finally saved enough money to buy a couple used keyboards. I'm playing in and out of local groups, and I was obsessed with guitar rock because guitar rock was not only dominating in the youth culture, but a lot of my favorite jazzers were guitarists. So I was obsessed with Pat Metheny, and I loved his compositions. And I realized one day when I was jamming over somebody's song, I go, the funnest songs for me to jam on are the ones that I actually like the song. I think the harmony is interesting. And Metheny was writing some very progressive, advanced jazz tradition stuff. And he also had one of the best keyboard players at the time, Lyle Mays, who I thought was just fantastic. So it was kind of best of both worlds. So I kind of set out I offered myself up in the paper as I will decorate your guitar rock so you don't sound like every other guitar band. So if you don't just want to be another REM, another U2, another Replacements, maybe let's mess around and see if I can't color your music. And there were bands that were starting to do that, and I thought that's where people could make use of me. That would be the niche that I would fill. And so that started working out. And then after my second or third band that we disbanded for whatever reason, the project Andy was working with that had like a manager and a place to rehearse and a guy that they could pay to help with road crew and a sound man and clubs in the Bay Area. They had a club circuit they were playing. And they actually were getting some attention from major labels. They lost their keyboard player. I don't even remember what the reason was. So Andy knew I would come home for the summers and work. I just worked 3 summer jobs to pay my dad back for loaning me money for the keyboards, the used keyboards I bought. Mm-hmm. I owed Pops, so I had to go work. So, but hey, could I maybe find some time to rehearse and sit in with the band that Andy was working with, which was early stages of Beatnik Beach. I don't know if they'd officially changed their name. And I was like, wow. Well, any excuse to play with my high school friend again. And not only that, these guys are at a level that I don't even have any familiarity with. I mean, I don't even know how you get to that level. So that was my summer of my junior year. And then what happened was that went really well. And we started to get even more record company attention. Not because of me. I'm just saying they were on this trajectory that was up and up. And I happened to be like kind of hitching a ride.
Yeah. And
so they were like, all right, so what are you going to do? And I almost quit USC and then went to a state school in the Bay Area to be with them. But my dad was like, there's no way I'm going to put you through school and then you're not going to graduate from SC for crying out loud. And I was like, yeah, that's kind of dumb. So I would, every 2 weeks, I kid you not, for most of the year, every 2 weeks, I would drive up to the Bay Area,
Oof.
rehearse, play 1 or 2 club shows, come back until they had another. This went on for months because I had to, because they were courting these record labels. It was like, this is do or die now. And then somewhere around the end of my senior year, we officially signed a deal with Atlantic. And now it's time to promote. This record had been in the works. They kind of resurrected old tracks and recorded some new ones to make the first Atlantic release for Beatnik Beach. But that's how I reconnected with Andy. That's how we came back in each other's lives after basically not even knowing we'd ever work again. We didn't have a goal to work again. You know, I'd moved my life to LA. He was doing whatever he was doing in San Francisco.
So then shortly thereafter, though, the album, Atlantic signs you, an album comes out. You guys are doing whatever you were doing with Beatnik Beach at the time. But shortly thereafter, you and Andy broke off and started writing together, leading up to what eventually became Jellyfish.
Yeah, so it was a very natural but an unfortunate evolution. So he and I are finally back in each other's proximity. It was very natural for us to, and we're both at this point. He's developed massively as a songwriter. I too now have so somewhere around my sophomore year of college, I'll never forget. I realized one day, oh my God, the most important thing in the world for me was not how well I could improvise over somebody else's brilliant composition. It was, can I write a brilliant composition? And the answer was no, because I had no idea how to do that. I knew how to do all this other stuff fairly well in certain areas for my age. Had no idea how to write an original idea that I dared play for my friends, you know, let alone that I liked or whatever. So it's literally that scene from a movie where when my roommate left and I had the room to myself, I'd bang out things on the keyboard and hum little melody shapes and stuff to myself. And then I go, oh, that sucks. And, I'd crumple up the piece of paper and you throw it by the trash can. And the stack of crumpled up ideas by the trash can just gets bigger and bigger and bigger as time is passing. You go, sucks. Nope. Doesn't. And what happened for me was I'd always liked the band XTC since I discovered them in high school. And, what was that? That was mid 80s. So this was before and during the Skylarking album comes out. So you've got the Dukes of Stratosphere stuff. You've got their 4 greatest records, in my opinion, Drums and Wires, Black Sea, English Settlement, Mummer, Big Express. It's just gold to me. It is my Beatles library, right? Obviously there's other stuff I like, but to this day, really XTC captures everything that I valued in pop rock songwriting. And
quick question on that note. I had to ask this because I knew that you were a big fan of XTC. Are you a fan of the Steven Wilson remixes?
I haven't heard them. I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, Steven Wilson has remixed
almost their whole catalog,
almost the whole XTC catalog at this point.
Amazing.
And I mean, Steven Wilson's got an amazing pair of ears, and he's done a lot of justice to those albums for sure. And if you haven't heard them, you should definitely check them out.
Yeah, and it probably means I'm going to be able to hear all those parts that I had to squint to decipher and decode. Now I'm going to be able to hear them with a lot more clarity.
Oh yeah, 100%. But continue, please.
Well, so all that is to say, XTC became my songwriting entry point, amongst others, but that's where I focused the most. Because not only was I fascinated by that writing team's choice of harmony and melody shapes, because on the one hand, it was very Beatle-y, but on the other hand, it was like, whoa, where are they getting this stuff from? It's their own sound. It was a mystery to me. And I said, well, I can sit down with anything and transcribe it. I've transcribed Alan Holdsworth solos and things that are much more intricate. So I should be able to figure out what these chords are in these shapes, which I did. And it was very, very, it was so educational and enlightening. But simultaneously, it allowed me to get way deeper into their arranging, right? So if anybody's a fan of Beatle catalog, one of the things that's fun for musicians is to go, well, what is the bass part doing? What is the third George Harrison guitar part doing? You know, what is this harmony that comes in the second verse doing? That's part of the fun of the Beatles, because as they had more time in the studio, they got to experiment and try crazier and crazier, more forward-thinking, progressive ideas. And of course, many, many bands have done that, from Queen to 10cc, Beach Boys. It just goes on and on and on. But XTC, again, they're, you know, Dave Gregory's guitar parts, it just so resonated with, I guess, the inner musician in me, maybe because it was somewhere, it was always drifting somewhere between that pub rock punk British thing, but they were also, they were inspired kids during Beatles, during Pink Floyd, during British psych rock. So you get all of that juicy stuff is ending up in their compositions somehow. And this is what I didn't understand, but this is what was resonating with me. So I began writing up a storm, and I'm just, all I want to do is write. And I literally stopped practicing piano. I remember one of my assignments was to learn a Thelonious Monk solo. The excitement for me to do that, and I'd worked on some Monk stuff before, and he's still one of the best and so gratifying. But I could tell I was losing interest. That was no longer the focus of my passion. The focus of my passion was, what the hell is going on, you know, on this B-side of this XTC song? I just don't understand it. And I had to crack that code. I had to figure it out. So I set out to do that. And then that allowed me to explore everything from the Byrds and all their incredible vocal harmonies to really getting into like Pet Sounds and early Beach Boys before that was fashionable at all. You would mention Beach Boys and people were like going, wait, the surf band? What could possibly be of value in going back through their catalog? And it was this weird community of weirdos who were like understanding that yeah, of course there were aspects of the Beach Boys that were inherently corny. I mean, they use them in Sunkissed commercials and stuff, and that whole California sound. But there was a whole other layer that you didn't know. And I went back to the very first record I bought with my own money was Kiss Alive 1.
Yeah.
Round of applause for that. The second record I bought with my own money was not Kiss Destroyer or Kiss Rock and Roll Over. It was Beach Boys' Endless Summer, which was also a double record set. And so I would sit down on a hot summer day. It was too hot to go outside and play. And I would just put on my records I bought. And I'm hearing these harmonies, and, you know, Brian, he's not a studied jazz guy, but he studied the Four Freshmen, and he studied his dad's record collection, and all that harmony is very jazzy and very advanced. So I was being stimulated by all that. Anyway, so by the time Andy and I join up in Beatnik Beach, I've now got a few song ideas I feel okay about playing for my friends, or in this case him, where I'm not embarrassed. And what he and I discovered at that time was that we were really good for each other because we both would have confidence to bring unfinished ideas to each other that we felt strongly about, but had kind of written ourselves into a puzzle. So like, well, what would maybe Andy do with this? What would Roger add to this? And that was really fun and exciting. I mean, needless to say. So we would just do that as an exercise. I'd come over his house after work, and instead of watching a TV show together, we'd go screw around in his study and just play ideas for each other. Well, what we didn't see coming is that when we would get excited about an idea and then attempt to complete it, and now let's flesh out an arrangement. What would the intro do? Is there a bridge? Would we double up the chorus on the end? Would there be a key change? You're just exploring. We realized there's a sound that's forming here, and it has nothing to do with Beatnik Beach. And that was a bitter pill to swallow, because we actually tried to bring some of these ideas to Beatnik Beach, and they kind of one or two of them were successful, but most of them just did not apply. We were being inspired by the McCartney Ram album,
Yeah.
and the Zombies Odyssey and Oracle, which, if you've ever heard Beatnik Beach, has nothing to do with that sound. And that's fine. But that meant, okay, we've got a problem here. And so it was just a natural evolution. So things like, well, I'll end there.
No, so but you guys have. I'm sure it's a problem in the sense of that you're in a band that has a record deal. You've climbed that mountain, and now you're creating stuff that has nothing to do with what this band was signed for.
Correct.
And then, from then, if we look at the next, say, I don't know, 6-ish years, a lot happened within that period of time when you start breaking it down, right? You had, you started Jellyfish, you got signed, you put out an album, you had, a couple of year period where you wrote with a ton of different people, you had another album, and then it ended. But a lot was packed into a very short period of time. And let's talk about that for a second. Obviously, you ramped up to Belly Button, and wrote that album, recorded that album, put out that album. It was well received by people that reviewed albums. May not have sold as many records as record labels like to see, because of, the times were a little weird then, right? It was sort of like hair metal was still there and grunge really wasn't there yet, but that was coming up and hair metal was going down, and you guys were none of that.
Yeah, so different from everything. Yeah.
We understood even back then it was a miracle that we were getting signed. So what happened was, as Beatnik Beach was dissolving artistically and personally, our A&R man in Atlantic said, well, I'm still willing to work with whoever brings me music. So I don't even recall if some of the other Beatnik Beach members submitted music, but Andy and I certainly had some demos to play for this A&R person, John Carter. I owe him the world, because he it's not like he said, I just want to hear from the lead singer. I don't care about anything else. But he's, no, sure, I'll listen to what Andy and Roger are doing. Now Andy sang in Beatnik Beach, but he wasn't considered the lead vocalist or the vocal sound. Maybe you could argue on certain songs, but the band had been founded by another gentleman, and he was kind of the designated band leader, et cetera, et cetera. So John Carter was willing to hear what Andy and I were working on. And long story short, after showering, we drove down to Los Angeles, took a meeting with him. He honored that meeting. We played him 4 songs. 2 of them we were in love with. The third one we deliberately gave him because it was more commercial than anything we'd written. We said, well, maybe he wants to hear something commercial. We were trying to hedge our bets. Sorry, the third song also we liked, but it happened to be in 3/4. It was a waltz. So he starts listening to the music, and I think the first song was the waltz, and he hits stop about halfway through. He goes, I don't like waltzes. So we're like, nope, okay. Yeah. And then I think one of the next songs was either Bed Spring Kiss or Man I Used to Be. In demo form, which people have now heard on the box set. So the demos you hear in the box set are the ones we played for the A&R guy.
Wow.
He said he listened to it all the way to the end. I think it was Man I Used to Be. He's like, very nice. He made some compliment. I don't remember what it was. Then I think the other one was like the more commercial rock tune, which I don't know if we included on the box set or not. What it was called, Fox Hunt. I don't remember.
I don't think that's on the box set.
Okay. And he goes, he listened almost all the way through, and my memory was he kind of knew what was up. He looked at us and he goes, nice hook. He said something, nice hook, but this isn't you guys, is it? He like this isn't what you're really about. He saw through it.
Yeah.
Right? Because he'd been doing this for 15, 20 years. He knew better. So then he listened to the final song, which I think was Bed Spring Kiss, and he was like, wow. Because there was a sophistication to it that I don't think he thought Beatnik Beach was ever capable of, something like that. And so he basically said, based on this, I will give you a small amount of money to go finish some more demos. You say you got some songs, we'll record them. Let's see what you got. So we're just like, oh my God, we've got to do this to save our deal. And thank God he was willing to take a chance. He didn't have to do that.
Yeah.
It was, so those are stories you want to hear about A&R guys and the corporate biz stuff, And like you said, we had nothing to do with the hair metal that was having success at the time.
Yeah.
So why is he bothering? He saw something, thank God. So we make another batch of 4 demos for him. He loved that collection. It was a variety of things. I think stuff like All I Want Is Everything was on there. I Want to Stay Home, I think, was on that. I don't remember the order. But anyway, those all ended up on the box set. And basically, so we saved our deal. It was at that time that I remembered being introduced to Jason Faulkner in LA, but I knew he was working in bands. I still had his number. I called him up, and he said, well, interestingly, the band I was in, the 3 o'clock, just broke up. I go, well, this guy that you don't know, I'm up here with him, old high school friend. We're working on stuff. We really could use your bass and guitar talents. And Jason's sister was living in San Francisco at the time, so he had a couch to sleep on, literally. And I was the only one that had wheels. Oh, Andy, I think Andy and his girlfriend had a car, but I lived closest to Jason. I would go pick him up. We'd drive to Andy's house and we'd work on demos. And we saw right away that Jason could not only sing, but he could harmonize and was interested in doing harmonies with us the way we were excited about that. So we had our trio. Certainly didn't have a touring band, but we had a trio. We finished 12 songs worth of demos, and John Carter was like, let's get you guys, I want to benefit from my investment. Let's get you into a studio. So he was the one that introduced us to Albie, who had been on a hiatus. Albie was tired of the record business, tired of producing commercial records and doing things he didn't want to do. He was coming off a hiatus, trying to be creative again. And John Carter said, I have a band for you that you're going to be able to not be preoccupied with having the next Cher or Barbra Streisand radio hit. I think you're going to have more fun with this. We hit it off with Albie immediately. And Albie had just worked with, like on a one-off, like on one song or an EP or something. I don't remember. It's all blurry. I'm sorry. He just worked with Jack Joseph Puig. And he said, I have the perfect engineer for this project. And as far as I know, Albie barely knew him or barely knew. He just had a hunch based on what he had discovered that he was going to be the right guy. And again, Jack Joseph was not the notorious mixer engineer that he had become. Yeah. So his rate was more affordable, if you will. And we weren't a big budget project, but Albie and Jack were like, I see promise with these guys and what they're trying to put forth. And then so that journey begins. But we used to joke when the record finally came. Oh, and then John Carter, I don't know what the circumstances were. He gets fired from Atlantic. We're literally in the studio. We're in the studio working on song number 4, and we find out our A&R guy, who's bankrolled this whole thing, he's just got fired.
Oh boy!
And the part of us was like, "No, how does this happen?" And then the other part of us was like, not shocked, because this is what we heard happened in the business. Yeah. And all of our friends, like 1 minute, they're the biggest club draw in San Francisco. The next minute, nobody's returning their phone calls because this, that, and the other happened. They had so-and-so's music attorney, and then that guy went to another agency, so he's not returning their phone calls anymore. So we'd heard these horror stories. And so every time something miraculous and cool and beneficial would happen for us, we'd go, wow, that's awesome. But don't get too excited.
Yeah.
Because this could all be over tomorrow.
A great cautionary tale for those of you that are aspiring musicians that are
watching this. And on the one hand, speaking for myself, that made me very precious, very kind of potentially uptight. Like, we can't fuck up, man. We got to do it right. This is our one chance. And so maybe I was a little more serious and stern and perfectionist in the studio that, other people would have liked if I'd lightened up maybe a little bit more. Maybe I would have been more comfortable to work with you. Hey, let your hair down, have a little bit more fun there, pal. But hindsight's 20/20. And it was what it was. So thankfully, with John Carter's departure, he was like, I'm not just going to walk over to another record company. I can't help you guys anymore. I have no clout. However, what I can do, because I've been in the business so damn long, is continue to call people up in publishing and in other record companies and music attorneys and blah, and tell them that they would be amiss if they didn't at least talk to Albie or meet with you guys or listen to some of the demos you've done. So he was encouraging us to wrap these 4 songs up as soon as possible So we have some kind of finished product to take to people. And what ended up happening was the publishing companies discovered us through John Carter and these 4 songs that we had, these studio quality recordings. And then the publishing companies started knocking at the doors. Well, so what that did was it showed financial interest. So if these big publishing companies were starting to talk about, well, maybe we should secure the Jellyfish publishing for X amount, we weren't even called Jellyfish yet, for X amount of dollars, well then, music attorneys are paying attention. Oh, maybe I can negotiate their deal, right? So the dominoes start falling in that direction for us in the best possible way. And Virgin Records was because of their immense success at the time, starting these other boutique labels, and they were resurrecting the Charisma label. And Phil Corderero, who was one of their head promo men, was heading up that label, and he heard us, and he's like, you guys have to be one of my first signings at the label, kind of thing. So that's how that all happened.
Phil Q was a great guy.
Yes, he was.
Just passed away just recently. So,
something I want to point out though, in case it got missed, that the demos that you hear on the fan club box set are the demos that they used to keep that deal. That's amazing because, man, I used to be in Bed Spring Kiss and I forget which other one you mentioned. Those, they're fully flushed out for the most part. Obviously they're demo recordings, but they're as you hear them on Belly Button. It's incredible considering the backstory of that. You guys were just sort of hustling just to be able to keep your deal.
One of the things I bought with my loan from my dad was a secondhand mixer and a secondhand 1/4-inch Fostex 8-track, reel to reel. Didn't know how to use them, but plug in, you see the meter moving. Oh, we must be getting a signal. So we had 8 tracks, which was more than any of us had ever had, to put our ideas down and to learn how to bounce and to maximize 8 tracks, as everybody did in that era.
Yep.
And we knew that some of our ideas, like Bed Spring Kiss, which actually wasn't entirely fleshed out, but these songs, we were fascinated by arrangement, and we didn't know how to arrange. So we just kept stumbling and trying things, lots of experimentation. And yes, my music education would help in some cases speed things up, but more often than not, it's like, well, I think a trumpet sound would sound good here. Let's get the best trumpet sample we have and see if we like the idea. And that would take 4 hours to make happen. And then you'd have to look and go, I know we just spent 4 hours on this, but trumpet sucks on this. It's not good. It doesn't sound cool like it did in my head, right?
Yeah.
But that's also part of the fun.
Yeah.
So we were all like crash course arrangers and learning to do that. And we all kind of had our strengths and weaknesses, and that's why we made a great team at that time. But we really had to, we knew that we weren't going to be able to sell anybody on the ideas unless we took them as far as we could, whether it was the A&R man, our production team, the publishing people. It was almost like we better show them what we got now.
Yeah.
So it had to be beyond a guitar, bass, drums demo.
And so then those demos saved the deal. You record this full album with Albie and Jack Joseph Puig. You bring your brother into the mix to play bass, so you have a touring band now at this point. Hit the road, do all the promo, do all the craziness of touring, etc. and so forth. Again, as far as sales go, it was a little funky, but you still crossed the 6-figure mark.
Right. So here's a little reality check there. So worldwide, Belly Button sold 425, I think, something like that. Spilt Milk worldwide sold about 375. Now, both of those numbers would be considered miracles in today's age.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Right? Those are huge numbers. But back then, the average was a band would get developed, recording budget, video budget, touring budget, whatever, promo budget. And if you went gold, so gold was about 500,000. If you go gold, it was a numbers game. Around gold, you were breaking even, which meant you're paying back all your loans to the loan sharks, the record company, which is great news. That's a victory.
Yep.
And now you're in pure profit. So past the, unless you start incurring other crazy expenses for some gargantuan video director who only do a video for X amount of dollars. But so anything past gold is you're kind of like, hey, feeling like a rock star, starting to make some money. Maybe I'll go look at a car to buy or something, right? That didn't happen. we got right under that. So although the numbers were good, they weren't gold. They weren't break-even numbers. And that's not an uncommon story. And that was certainly what the case was for us. So while we did travel, I look back on it now and compared to what bands have had to deal with the last 20 years, we toured more comfortably than most. No, we didn't have like a fancy bus or fancy hotels. We were very lucky. We did just fine. But it was, and you're in your 20s, so you don't care anyway. Yeah. But you'd get off tour and be like, oh, I don't have anything to show for this. I don't have any money to put in the bank, and I still have rent and all that stuff. In the case of Andy and I, we had enough leftover publishing money that we didn't have to go work at the hardware store. We didn't have to have a day job, and we could do what we did for Spilt Milk, which was 6 days a week. I drove up to his house. He lived near Petaluma, California. I was living in San Francisco at the time, and that was an 1.5-hour drive back and forth every day. All the recording equipment we had situated in his house, and we started demoing every song for Spilt Milk, or and songs that didn't make it. And it was, I loved doing the work, but it was like, these were 10-hour days, and then the drive. But we were just like, no, we can't stop until we've flushed out these ideas. So thank God we didn't have to work a day job. There would have been no way to create Spilt Milk.
Yeah.
And in between the album cycle for Belly Button and working on Spilt Milk, you guys were enlisted to write with and for Ringo Starr and Brian Wilson, amongst others. Your quote, I do need to ask about this. Your quote about working with Brian Wilson, you called it utterly surreal. Can you expand upon that? Because we are curious.
Yeah, sure. God bless Don Was at the time, who was, really on the top of the world with his producing career when he's basically stayed there. But at the time, he thankfully was a fan of the Belly Button album, and he had reached out to us because he's working on that Ringo solo record, Time Takes Time, and he thought it'd be worth having us submit some song ideas for Ringo. And he also thought it'd be neat if these guys could sing and maybe play some instruments, add some stuff to the recording. He was bringing in lots of different artists. It was great, and we just happened to be one of them. So that's how that happened. And we submitted 5 songs, and I think most of those demos are on the box set. And they chose one of the 5 songs, and then they rebuilt it based on our demo, and Andy and I got to sing on it. I think Jason sang too, or we played some percussion. And then we got to be in the video for the single that they did, which is Way to the World. And so that's how that all happened. That was like just this whirlwind, somebody pinch me kind of thing. But then also he was going to start working with Brian, because Brian was starting to come out of his shell after that awesome record he did in 1988 with Warner Brothers and Lenny Waronker and those people. I actually thought there was some great stuff on that record. But he was starting to rear his head. And Don, like a lot of people, got in there and was entrusted to help him start, what's the new modern Brian Wilson going to look like. So thankfully he thought of having Andy and I try some co-writing with him. Once we got over the shock that this was actually going to be a possibility, reality. We found that out while we were mixing the Spilt Milk record. We were still in the studio mixing, but of course Jack was doing almost the entirety of that work. But I had the luxury of going to hang out in the studio, and while Jack was in the control room mixing, I could be at the giant grand piano. And I said to myself, I'm like, I'm not going into Brian Wilson's presence with unless I've got like 5 ideas to present. We better just have at least one that we believe in, because I don't want to sit there. In my head, I was like, I don't want to sit there because I don't know what shape Brian's in. I don't know how inspired he is to do anything. He might not know who the hell we are. We're going to be there because Don has told him, I want you to meet these guys. So I didn't want to be like, you got any ideas? No. You got any ideas? Not really. And then if I had to sit down at the piano, I would have been a nervous wreck. I wouldn't have been relaxed enough to come up with anything. So I told Andy, we should both work on stuff. And I know Andy was working on ideas. I was working on ideas. And I had this one idea that I played for Andy. I go, I really believe in this. With your approval, and if you agree, I think it should be something that we present to Brian. And that was the roots of what became I Wish It Would Rain, off the Land of Pure Imagination solo album. And thankfully, Andy loved the idea. He go, oh, I think this is very solid. This is something we can at least be ready to present to Brian. So we met at one of the Beach Boys rehearsal warehouses in Santa Monica. I don't know if they still have the complex. But it just is like a regular studio environment, nothing special. But we arrived with Don, I think, and Brian was coming. I don't remember how we all arrived, but we walked in with Don, and Brian joined us at the same time. And just as he's like introducing us, Don gets a very important phone call. So he has to excuse himself and go into the other room. He goes, here, you guys just sit in the lobby and hang out and get to know each other. And so it was right out of the scene of a movie. The 3 of us sit down, and it's like we're like high school girl and high school guy waiting to ask each other person to dance.
Oh God!
Right? We're literally sitting on the couch with our heads down, twiddling our thumbs, and Brian's just sitting there like, staring at the ceiling or something. Because other than hello, shaking your hands, nobody knows what the hell to say. And it's no mystery. All the footage all of us have seen, typically Brian is not social. He's not particularly extrovert, at least in recent years. And he seemed very withdrawn and quiet, at that nothing that was offensive or anything, but just like, oh, he's just kind of chill, okay, so be it. So we're like waiting for Don to get off the phone. Like, please speed this up. He eventually got off the call and he goes, all right, this is great. So why don't we, you want to go over into the music room and we can just, talk and think about what we all want to do. Okay, great. We're walking towards the music room, and I go, oh shit, I know what's up. And what was up was, although this was a recording studio, in my memory, there weren't a lot of instruments sitting around, turned on, ready to go. There's a boring little spinet piano sitting there. Now, it's me, Andy, Brian, and Don and 4 or 5 handlers. There's like people who are running the studio, assistants, people who are making sure Brian's taken care of. Does he need anything? Has he had lunch yet? Which I'm sure was like just an average day. He always has these people running around their environment. And particularly at that time in his life, if you remember, he was still coming off of the Eugene Landy relationship. He had not announced himself yet as a solo performer who had his backup band and re-performing all these incredible touring and the confidence that it takes to do that. That was not happening. None of that was happening. These were the beginning stages of that. So I'm like, right, I have to go sit down at the piano, because I'm not going to ask Brian to sit down at the piano because Don says, all right, you guys got any ideas? And they're like, well, yeah, Andy and I have one, and it's great. So looks like I'm going to sit down and play it.
This sounds painful.
I was a nervous wreck. And we had met because of Jellyfish. We had met a variety of celebrities at that point. We'd met Brian May, some other people that were very surprising. These kind of came. I believe we'd met Cheap Trick at that point, or at least Robin, and our bass player friend, whose name skips.
Tom Peterson.
Thank you, Tom Peterson. And so it's not like I was weirded out by that. I was weirded out by, it's Brian Wilson, but it's modern day Brian Wilson. He's not the fun-loving surf teen that I've seen a few clips of and watched a couple documentaries about. And so I wanted to impress him. I wanted to impress my partner. I wanted to impress Don Was, who had taken a risk bringing us into this situation to begin with.
Yep.
He hadn't heard a single idea. He just assumed maybe we had some. And I'll never forget, I when I'm nervous, I have a tendency to rush, speed up. So I closed my eyes and was like, don't rush. I said to myself. So I actually, Andy told me, he goes, man, you played that song really slow. because I overcompensated. But through the miracle of music, what happened was, and I, you know, as Andy was used to working with me, whenever I would sing melodies to him, I would sing gibberish because I never wrote a lyric. Andy had that absolutely under control. Occasionally I would offer up a lyrical idea, but I didn't practice that. I wouldn't practice that until I started doing solo stuff. But so I'm singing gibberish, but all I knew was in the chorus, I wanted to say, well, I wish it would rain upon my head, blah, blah, blah. And that's what I kept that lyric for the solo song. And so I sing, all I had was a verse and a chorus. So I did verse, chorus, verse, chorus. And as soon as I stopped, it was very apparent because it was a very traditional song form. I was doing something that's very kind of a classic. I wasn't trying to reinvent the wheel. I was trying to play something that referenced a bygone era, but hopefully was as catchy as anything in a modern sense. So as soon as I finished chorus 2, I'm like, dun, 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 and Brian goes, and then the surfer girl bridge goes here. And that was really the first thing we heard him say the whole day, the whole afternoon, because it was a surfer girl kind of 6'8" feel. And so he was relating to it. And yeah, that's logically what would happen next is some kind of bridge. And so he was very excited. And he goes, so, well, you know, something like this. And so I moved over on the piano bench. He sat down and he started playing. And then he too was singing gibberish. And he was like going, ba-da, ba-da, ba-bow, bow, bow, bow. And he starts singing something that sounds like Mike Love is singing it. It's like it was straight out of their songbook. I mean, for all I know, he was referencing another idea that he already had. It fit the same tempo and everything. But he, piano player to piano player, he said, oh, I love the half diminished chord you're playing before you go to the chorus. Like, oh, he's paying attention. Like he's not nodding off in the corner. So now, and then I think Andy cracked a joke or he said something. Anyway, we're all starting to giggle. We're having a laugh. Don is like, oh, this is awesome. These guys are bonding. They seem to have a solid idea here. Brian seems excited. And I feel my whole body decompress and just relax into the moment. And I'm like, wow, this can happen. And I can relax and enjoy this monumental moment. And then I kid you not, easy come, easy go. Just then, one of these faceless people taps him on the shoulder and goes, Brian, it's almost 2:30, and as you know, that's your nap time. So we need to make that nap start happening now. Okay, guys, this has been a blast. It's time for my nap. It's been Roger. That's your name. Good to meet you, Andy. Fantastic. You know, to be continued or something. And Andy and I are looking at each other, going, no, nap.
Who naps?
That we're on a roll. This is actually happening. Don't stop. And then, even though we were all elated and it seemed like there'd be no reason to not get back together again and continue the process, which clearly we were capable of doing in some way. Some trajectory happened with Don was involved with Brian and them working together, and it didn't continue. So if Don wasn't going to work with him, well, there was nobody making sure that our names were
right.
So the whole thing vanished.
Oh my God.
Wow.
And I'm like, we were like going that's like the head cheerleader saying, you know who I'd like to go to the prom with? You. Really? You're not going to take the quarterback? No, I have my eye on you. Oh, okay, awesome. And then she doesn't.
You
call
never hear from her. Yeah.
Right,
She moves across town.
Yeah. She's in the pickup with the quarterback, and it was literally that much of a just tragedy.
Wow.
Because
It's utterly surreal.
Yeah, utterly surreal. It was like, hey, you know what? Next time, don't tease us. How about you not tease us?
Wow.
And I'm joking, but I'm so thankful for that memory and that opportunity, as I know Andy would be, and just add that to the storybook.
Look, that's an amazing story, and when I heard about the interaction, that being utterly surreal, I'm like, I gotta know more. I have to know more. Like, there's got to be, because if it's funny, the more crazy the interaction, the fewer words it takes to describe it, right? Because they're usually pretty perfect. And those two words are pretty darn perfect from everything that you just said.
Yeah.
So,
all right. So that happened.
I don't know if you've heard, shortly thereafter, Don got it in his hat that Andy and I should write for the new Kim Basinger album.
Oh boy.
He was working on. So we got to meet with her, and we met with her at the recording studio. It was just the most convenient. And Jack and Albie were like little school kids because they couldn't believe it was so charming and hilarious. They couldn't believe like this movie starlet was coming over to the studio and going to grace us with her presence, and she was going to talk to these two nerds. And she was very sweet, and she seemed excited about making music. And it was just to like meet personalities. Nobody played any ideas. We didn't have any ideas. We were working on our record, but Don just wanted us to meet. I don't know whatever became of that. That never panned out. But we got to meet Kim Basinger at the height of her Hollywood stardom.
That probably didn't suck.
It didn't suck.
And then you wrap up the recording of Spilt Milk. It comes out early '93. At this point, you had you and Andy, of course, were the driving force in Jellyfish. At that point, you had some studio guys like Lyle Workman was on that album, and a couple other heavy hitters. Wasn't T-Bone on that album too?
T-Bone Wolf played bass. So on a portion of the record.
Yeah. So heavy hitters are coming in and laying down tracks for you. For me, and I know that Nick has his opinion on it as well, and I think it's the same one. I look at this as like the seminal, of that era and other eras, like the seminal power pop album, period, from a songwriting and production standpoint. If you ask drummers, they say the best tom sounds ever are on that album. And I've heard this from more than one drummer, unsolicited. So, and then you listen to the different textures that those songs create. And, while, dragging in that sort of retro sound with the harpsichord type sounds, et cetera, and so forth that you guys developed, the amount for me on the amount of layering and attention to detail, like you said, you were tough in the studio essentially, but that paid off, because that is something that if there was a straight line that ran through, in my opinion, your recordings from then on, was that attention to detail, those little things, like, oh, well, there's like a clave here that is, and it's the only time you ever hear it is there, but it's placed perfectly. And then, like at the end of Ghost #1, there's a banjo. Like, okay, well, that's not necessarily normal, but it works because it's perfect. And because it works well for that song. That attention to detail is really what resonates with me with that particular album, and how you can hear every single part on every single song. And Nick, I know that you want a fanboy on it too, so I'm going to
No, you're right. The attention to detail is just out of this world. But I always have looked at it as that's like a record as a musician that you dream of making, right? Like you guys gave it everything you had, like the kitchen sink, all of it, right? And I think I've asked you this privately, but when you hear it back, do you think you guys accomplished what you set out to do? Does it resonate with you the way it resonates with other people?
I would have to say mostly. So for example, for me, Spilt Milk is, I'm proud of both records completely. I have no regrets, but a lot of the arranging and production goals that I personally had for myself and us as a sound, we started off with Belly Button and accomplished that. But to me, that album comes out as part of the vision is coming to fruition. We kind of closed the deal, in my opinion, on Spilt Milk. Like Spilt Milk, we finally get to say everything we had always been trying to say, from the beginning of the demos to the recording of Belly Button to now demos for Spilt Milk and now Spilt Milk. And it's just more of the vision was completed from my perspective. So I was very happy about that. Now, of course, I have things that hindsight are 2020, and I know more about the recording process and the arranging process and how to capture certain things and how to realize ideas, 30 years after, and wish I had a time machine to go do things differently. But that's always going to be the case. And I'm very thankful for just having had the opportunity that a record company bankrolled both those records, that my partner and I were in tandem with our level of attention to detail, perfectionism, a standard that we held each other to, and the whole project to, that we had visions for these songs, and we weren't going to stop until they were as correct as possible. And I know how unique of an opportunity that was. I mean, we knew it at the time.
Yeah.
And again, because now Spilt Milk's coming out, hair metal has died a fiery death because a little band called Nirvana came out of seemingly nowhere and basically shift all the rebellious teens and piss off. I'm going to piss off mom and dad, not with Guns N' Roses. Now I'm going to piss mom and dad off with the Seattle sound. And again, we had nothing to do with any of that, even though there was hair metal we liked and there was grunge that we liked. But we obviously, what we were saying to the world had nothing to do with that in terms of writing. So we often joked about ourselves as the most punk rock thing happening at the time. Yes, thank you for noticing the attention to detail. It's just all about what our heroes did, and wanting to have our own say, make our own statement, our own contribution to that lineage, that legacy, on our own terms and with our personalities and with the personalities of the other band members. And it's a real honor and I just blessing to have been able to had that brief window to have our say. And as you know, there have been certain factions of fans and music makers that have recognized that were inspired by it, whether it was a drum sound, or an arrangement detail or a lyric, on and on.
It's, you guys are, Jellyfish was, and this is not a disparaging remark at all, but it was a band's band, in a lot of ways, because, you showed other bands what was possible you know, if they wanted to stretch their own boundaries and find their own voice and do these things, you know, and there's other bands out there that are like that. You know, another one that comes to mind, not in the same genre per se, but Failure is another band that sort of was like a band's band, you know, because I mean, they wrote great songs, and you know, Fantastic Planet is like a bulletproof album, and everybody heralds is like, that's amazing. But from a commercial standpoint per se, it didn't do what it probably should have, for either for you guys or for Failure for that matter. The funny thing is, though, the parallel there is that y'all still make music. You guys are still making music. Ken Andrews is still making music. He went on to a very, you know, long and storied producing career, and Failure's still making music. And you guys, you know, apart from Andy being part of that, there's different iterations of Jellyfishdom that wind up popping up, and Imperial Drag was the first one that following Jellyfish's breakup. Now that you could tell that there's still parts of that there, but it really seemed to pull a little bit more from like a 70s glam kind of influence in a lot of ways. Would you agree with that? Or what were the influences for you with Imperial Drag? Like, you were working with Eric Dover in that band.
Yeah. So it was more about Eric Dover's personality and the world that's built around that. I was naturally, towards the end of Jellyfish, I was naturally writing more heavy pop, more guitar oriented. I was enjoying the role that rock keyboards played in a guitar context. I mean, something I've always been fascinated with, right? I mean, one of my favorite keyboard players is John Paul Jones, because I love what he did in that blues rock, that British blues rock band. And so that's a lot of what was driving, you know, bands like Steppenwolf, Cheap Trick, certainly, Big Star, Badfinger. That was all playing a role in Imperial Drag. But you, just because you say, oh, these are my influences, well, it's still got to come from the personalities. And the driving personality of Imperial Drag is Eric Dover, with his amazing voice and his lyric writing.
And for those that don't know, he did go on to be the vocalist for Slash's Snake Pit. So
yeah, and he played in Alice Cooper's band for a
exactly.
long time.
So you could tell where his voice took him. And if those of you that may not have heard anything that Eric's sang on with Roger, you probably heard some of that other stuff.
And obviously Eric's role in Jellyfish was to play all those difficult guitar parts and sing the highest, one of the most difficult harmonies, because he had the strongest. He and Andy were the male tenors in our group. And so Eric had all those insane acrobatic high parts while having to play these guitar parts. So, but while we were aware that Eric wrote original music, we didn't know to what extent. And as he and I were determining whether or not we should start a post-Jellyfish project together, Eric was on a writing crest that was just like soaring. And I was like, oh my God, I've got to try to, if I want to create a band with him, I've got to try to capture that now, because he's on a roll. He's on a roll. So, but again, that meant, is his personality and his vision compatible with what I want to do? And there was a lot of like head scratching post Jellyfish, like meaning, what is it that I want to do exactly? Because the Jellyfish spirit and sound was still very much alive in me. So it was what it was. In other words, those flavors added up, however they added up for Imperial Drag. And
I do have to ask a question while we're paused there just for a second. How you doing on time? You okay?
Yeah, I can actually go if we need to until 9.
Perfect.
Which I have no problem doing. I'm very well aware that my responses are very long-winded.
No, we love it.
We're
trying to make sure
enjoying
we're
it.
not inconveniencing you.
You're certainly not going to offend us, sir.
No, I have some projects I should be working on, but they're kind of boring, and I don't want to work on them. I'd rather my ego would rather love talking about itself for the next hour.
We're better than the boring project. Got it. I'm seeing where we are in this particular universe at the moment. So boring project, hanging out with music nerds.
It's way
okay. No, thank you. And look, we really appreciate your time. And we're loving all this. You are certainly not boring us. So, but we do want to be cognizant of your time. We want to make sure that we get through everything that, that you have on your mind as well. So just keeping that in mind for everybody that's listening too. So,
well, and also, which won't be a mystery to you guys, but it's something to talk about. Jellyfish breaks up, and it's not like, well, now the world is mine and I can do whatever I want because I was part of this band that made some noise, and everything is just going to fall into place for the next round. Just like it did when this guy left that 160s band and then he started that cool 70s band, and just like the Bee Gees had their first run in the 60s and they were like a Beatle pop band, and then they had great successes, this disco thing. Yet you never hear about all the hard knocks and all the rough road and the shit that didn't work out in between. So time was of the essence. One of the things that Andy and I hated, and it was a big reality check that really saddened us, and that was all the time that had to be spent promoting the recording. Now, we enjoyed playing live. It was not as much as being in the studio, but it's not like, I'm not saying we were opposed to the road or opposed to playing live, but the fun for us and the inspiration and getting in there and working like dogs for us was creating original ideas and then bringing them to fruition in the studio. Whatever that process looked like, that was what we lived for. Because all of our heroes put out records every 9 months, every year growing up.
Yeah.
Oh, there's 5 Giant Zeppelin albums 4 years into their career.
Anybody born in the past 30 years doesn't know that.
No, they have no concept.
They have no clue.
So we were just like, well, wait a minute. Yeah, thank you, everybody, for recognizing Belly Button and patting us on the back. It feels good. We're ready to do the next record. Yeah, that's not going to happen for about 1.5 years, and it's not going to come out for 3 years after the first one.
Eesh.
That's not how it's supposed to go, because you have a momentum. You want to capture that momentum, and then you're just like left, right. Well, that was a reality check. That's not really what was happening then, unless you were incredibly successful. And while Andy and I were certainly prolific, I wouldn't say we were fast songwriters. There were certain parts of the process that sometimes would take longer than others. Sometimes lyrics would go fast, or they could take a while. Sometimes doing those background vocal arrangements would be, we've got our ideas lined up, knock it out in 3 days. Sometimes take 3 weeks. And you have to allow it to be what it's going to be. And you have to have the patience and discipline to stick with it, no matter how arduous that process is going to be, if you believe in the song idea, right? Not to mention all the unforeseen, unexpected shit that's going to happen naturally. Yeah. So that was very, very frustrating for us. So when Jellyfish broke up in 94, and it had been 1 year since Spilt Milk had come out, I'm just going, I'm in my late 20s and the clock's ticking. I went right to work. And for Eric and I, part of what going right to work meant was, Eric, you've written a shit ton of ideas. I've got a shit ton of ideas. Are they going to line up? Do they complement each other? Can we sit in a room and write an original idea together from scratch? What does this all mean? And we demoed up a ton of stuff and then looked at each other and went, yeah, that's cool, but is this what we really want to say? So we had like more than an album's worth of material, and then we both looked at each other and went, yeah, but maybe 2 or 3 of these songs are worth sharing with the world, particularly post Jellyfish. I mean, Eric felt as pressured by having been in Jellyfish, and what do we say together next with that Jellyfish reputation, as I did. And he wasn't even a founding member, but it was still, he got it. He understood. And so it took us a while to amass what became that first record, the Imperial Drag record. And I'm glad we took our time and waited, because I don't know that I would have stood. We were trying a lot of things, and it was hard to feel confident about a percentage of it. Anyway, that's typical for any group. And so it was not easy putting that together. We loved the musicians that we found, And although computers were starting to take over the music business and being employed in very clever and interesting ways, we were still very much going back to roots, going back to musicians who know how to play. You know, I always should say, if we're going to jam in the key of A for 5 minutes, it better be interesting. There ain't anything more boring than a bunch of whack-offs who don't know how to make jamming in A. You know, that's already been done. Yeah. You got to come out and say something on it. And I knew that our writing, whoever I worked with, the writing was always going to be what was going to be different, and what was going to be the stamp of the sound, the statement. It was going to be the statement. So we finally felt, when we had a collection of tunes that were kind of this groovy thing. They always had an edge to them. But Eric had this great ability to take what would otherwise, well, we were both very conscious of, we didn't want to do the blues. So although we were doing heavy rock, it couldn't sound like, we didn't want it to be classic rock. It had to have a twist on it. And being fans of highly melodic music, which you could understand from us being in Jellyfish, we were always looking for ways to take those melodies and twist them up and make them more lyrical, much in the way like a McCartney would do a hard rock song or something. Mm-hmm. You still got to be able to bang your head, and it's got to make you want to dance, because it has to have a sexual physicality to it. But that doesn't mean you just like, yeah, baby, mama. You can't just Paul Rogers riff the thing. Now, I love Paul Rogers. I want him, if he could sound genius just reading from the phone book, right? He helped invent that blues riffing. But Eric Dover and I aren't interested in reinventing the blues riffing wheelhouse. So Eric was really good at creating these melodic twists that sometimes I'd be like, where are you pulling that from? That's fantastic. And that's the stuff I wanted to try to capture and harness and run with. So there are songs like Stare Into the Sun, Cross-Eyed. Well, to this day, this is primarily his idea. I contributed to the arrangement, but the song is Illuminate. That's one of the most beautiful, like, mysterious rock ballads ever. It's so Eric Dover. It's his personality. Like, I listen to it and I go, I don't know what's influencing this. I do not hear what your influences are on this song. And so we were trying to create a collection of stuff like that. It was like, just like Jellyfish, there was a familiarity to it, but it's us. It's the, you know, and that's all we set out to do with Imperial Drag. And I think for the most part, we succeeded in that. Zodiac Sign, Boy or Girl, Cross-Eyed, all those tunes have it's Roger and Eric.
Yeah.
It's Eric, certainly Eric Dover's vocal prowess and his very super interesting lyrical approach, which couldn't have been more different than Andy's lyrical approach. But to me, like, having been blessed enough to work with two very highly stylized lyricists back to back like that. So, you know, and again, I wish, because this question is going to come up inevitably, everybody's scratching their heads. How come these bands kept breaking up? It always came down to personalities who were forced to live together, just like any roommates, right? I'm oversimplifying, but it's like, how long can you sustain those personalities? And for a while you can. And then, like any couple, any relationship, you hit bumps in the road. And there's no grand mystery for the Rolling Stone interview for me to share with the fans. There's no, and then he met this movie star and he was never the same. He ran off with her and I couldn't get on the phone anymore. And then this person started, was really getting into substances and drinking and things like, no, none of that was happening. Yeah. This was just people who had, by the nature of what they were doing, like any band, you're living together, eat, sleep, and drinking together 24/7. And you have to do that because you have to merge personalities to create this art together. You have to go inside. You have to go deep. You have to be highly vulnerable, open, intimate, like any relationship you would have with a significant other. You can't Now, solo artists can do what they want to do, but if you're going to couple in a band and the band sound is a culmination of personalities, you're basically married to these people.
Yep.
And like any marriage, the relationship's going to ebb and flow. It's going to hit rocky points and all that. And basically, I often joke, if Jellyfish, for example, if like you could go to like band therapy, and you could like go do what couples do in couples therapy, like maybe we would have had a chance to iron out some of those personal challenges. And this is without blame to anybody. It's just what happens when people are forced to live together. You're going to have these rifts, and we decided at different points these rifts, it wasn't sustainable.
Mm-hmm.
And there were other things where like writing, certainly in the case of Andy and I, the writing emphasis starts drifting apart, where it's like the ideas and what's inspiring them are too different to merge them. Whereas in the old days, the ideas were similar enough where merging was just an easier process. So it's, again, not fascinating, not particularly interesting, but very, very common.
Yeah.
And natural.
It's what you hear a lot from bar bands, that they have those same things like, artistic differences. Like, well,
Yes.
all right. How can you have artistic differences if you're playing for free beer every night? Well, guess what? You can, because you're in a band and rehearsing with these people. Sorry, Nick, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say what's amazing to me, especially after through this interview, the context that you've put the relationship that you and Andy had together, dating all the way back to high school, and what you guys ended up accomplishing together, especially coming off this, and for that to sort of fall apart and you make the decision to just get up and brush yourself off. I'm not trying to simplify it, because I'm sure it was extremely emotional, and then make a record as great as the Imperial Drag record in a completely different avenue is incredible. And then clearly on the side of Andy, he chose that he was done dealing with those personality rifts, because you've gone on to have multiple projects and do different things, and as Mike mentioned at the beginning of this, even return to working with some of these guys that have been in your past, and he hasn't done that. So it clearly, it just shows, again, like you're saying about a relationship, how when people go through something, how the outcome is different for multiple people.
Yeah, it's different for everybody. And and unless you're a fly on the wall witnessing all of it, it's hard to have people understand how these things can happen.
And that's one of those things that, again, happened with Imperial Drag. As you said, that sort of growing apart and parting of the ways. But we'll get back to some of those other people later in this story.
Well, and speaking for myself, post Imperial Drag, right? So I was 31 years old at the time. I couldn't believe I'd actually been like writing and creating and earning a living in music for 20 years. That in and of itself was a miracle to me. Not that I didn't believe in my skill set, but it's not about that. It's convincing other people that they should believe in your skill set. And one of my roles, and I own this, that naturally would happen was that I would certainly it's an extension of my personality type. Certainly it's an extension of my goal-oriented, very pragmatic personality, very type A. I would often kind of end up taking on extra roles, or I don't want to say like assistant manager roles, but they're a lot of like behind the scene roles for putting projects together, a lot of minutia. And I welcomed doing that because I have a relationship, with control and being controlling. And that no matter how much mileage that actually got us or got me, whether I'm working with people or working independently, that's a great asset. It can be a great asset, but it's also a double-edged sword in that it's very exhausting.
Yeah.
It's very trying on the nerves and one's emotions. and we all start out with like a reserve of emotions, and there's nothing that's going to exhaust it quicker than a dysfunctional relationship with your girlfriend or her with you, or a band.
Yeah.
Right. And it doesn't matter if we're talking about the wedding band or the Rolling Stones.
Yep.
Because it's the hardest job you'll ever love, kind of thing. And you won't sleep. And it's got to be right. And it is your statement to the world. I mean, it's classic artist dilemma, trial and tribulations. And so by the time I finished Imperial Drag, I was like, I can't do this anymore. I can't. Being in bands is killing me. I was seeing therapists. Thankfully, I was not distracting by going into substance abuse and things like that. But I had plenty of demons and things that I was working out that I would use to buffer and try to escape from a band challenge and the high pressure. Now, look, nobody had a gun to my head. I had my own gun to my own head because I wanted things. If I'm going to share art with the world, I want it to be the best it can be. And people like yourself and fans picked up on that, and we're grateful for that. But it was like giving birth to triplets every freaking time. And that's taking into account that I was surrounded by some of the most immense talent on the planet at the time. And we'd all decided to join forces in these we're almost like super groups without having been in a successful band yet, kind of thing, right? These three prog bands break up, and then the members team up over here for yet another super group prog band, right? I always felt that Jason Faulkner's and Eric Dover's and Andy Sturmer's like, oh my God, how lucky I am to have run into, manifested. We all manifested each other, and look at this great stuff that we have done together. So Imperial Drag folds, and I was like, and I would joke with my friends, I was like, oh my God, I can't do this anymore. I'm just going to be a side man to something that's already doing great business and successful. And I'm just going to play keyboards because I can't, I'm wiped out.
Well, you definitely did that with the Moog Cookbook.
Yeah. The Moog Cookbook was a healthy, the Moog Cookbook was a healthy way of, it was alter ego.
Yeah.
It was, I don't have to pressure myself to be the power popster Jellyfish guy and convince Rolling Stone that we need to be on their cover. I'm going to go whack off over here with my friend. And literally we started the project because he and I were collecting. It was really fun to collect vintage gear in the mid 90s because it didn't cost anything.
Yeah. And
Brian Kehoe and I so loved vintage keyboards. And at a time when a lot of people had said, oh, that shit's terrible. It's corporate, it's disco, it ruins music, it's too artificial. And we said, keep saying that because we're going to buy it all up for pennies on the dollar. And we're going to have fun doing it. And then we would start telling people, well, we have these keyboards. If you want to put them on your record, it might be neat to, like, nah, we're a guitar band. So Brian and I started working on ideas together for fun. And it was so hilarious to us that we were resurrecting these antiquated sounds that it literally was comedies like, this is going to make our friends laugh. And then one thing led to another. And especially when Eric Dover had basically been captured by Slash to be in Slash's Snake Pit, because it was just supposed to be like, I'm going to go record the record and play some showcases, and then I'm going to come back and we're going to finish Imperial Drag. And then that turned into 6-7 months of him touring with Slash, and I couldn't get him back. And I'm like, I'm never going to have my singer back again. I was just beside myself with fear and depression. And one of the ways I didn't, jump off a bridge or get into some kind of other horrible numbing device was to do the Moog Cookbook, because I could go over to Brian's apartment and we would screw around with these keyboards for hours on end. And then Brian, this was, pre-internet, pre-YouTube, Brian had developed this relationship with people all over the world. He was swapping VHS tapes of rare concert footage.
Oh,
So Brian would have some weird Beatles footage that he had found, and he was swapping with some guy in France, and he was going to give us Serge Gainsbourg and French pop that we had never seen. We didn't know about any of this stuff. because we'd stay up till all hours in the morning watching all this crazy exotic music, some of which was just like footage of James Gang from 1973 on some British television show. I'm like, I know Joe Walsh and I know Funk 49, but oh my God, look how great they were. These guys were like Nirvana before Nirvana, you know, and just having our minds blown. So Brian was a great friend to have it, that we're still friends, but we were in each other's lives a lot at that time. And it was a great, healthy way to distract from the woes of Jellyfish breaking up and the challenges that were in Imperial Drag, like any band. So that's how Moog Cookbook happened.
And if those of you that have not heard this, it is available on Apple Music and Spotify. You need to, because it's so fun to listen to and hear, you know, yours and Brian's renditions of songs like Black Hole Sun or even Smells Like Teen Spirit, for that matter.
Sweet Home Alabama.
Sweet Home Alabama, all done on like Moog synths.
I got to play drums again.
Yes, there you go. So he got to
fun,
play drums again as well.
It took me a while to remember like how to be good enough to record. And Brian's like, well, you go practice in the other room, and because Brian kind of masterminded the recordings and the tape machines and stuff.
And the thing is, you had to go and play, and not just straight drums. You're playing like bossa nova beats over songs that didn't have it in the first place, you know, and like swing beats. And like, it is so much fun to listen to it. And it's such I could see how you kind of looked at it as kind of like a freeing and cleansing project.
Exactly,
because
right.
Really there was no pressure in that one. It's just, we push buttons. It sounds good. Great. Move on, you know? And throughout the years, you've revisited that project into the 2000s and such. So, are there any designs of a new Moog Cookbook album?
No, we've talked about it many, many times. And it's really a time thing. If we could clone ourselves, you'd have 5 more Moog Cookbook records.
So you could be doing that right now as opposed to talking to us.
Well,
I'm just saying, you know,
that's one of the things. Yes. But look, like any freelance musician, I've always done my best to surf this super bizarre business, because none of it makes sense. And all the things that people told you, this is going to be important and you got to do this, is like, yeah, maybe, but times change, genres change, the music business changes, and it's been a real exercise in surfing. And I promised myself I was going to do whatever I had to do. I'm not going back to the 9 to 5. I'm not going to go work at the hardware store. It's just not, I knew how miserable I would be. And I said, so thankfully there've been lots of ways, no shortage of ways for me to figure out. I have a business sense now. I long to have a much better business sense.
Don't we all?
But compared to some of my very, very talented musical friends,
yeah,
they don't know how to parlay their immense talent into commerce.
Yeah.
I've learned along the way, but I'm way better at it now than, of course, I was in my 20s. So thankfully, by some miracle, I've been able to, I wear so many different hats, right? Because I'm not like the master of anything really in Los Angeles, but I can do a whole lot of stuff if you need me to come bail you out on a project, kind of thing, depending on what the project is. And I take great pride in that. There's, especially when you commit to freelancing in a city like LA or New York or London.
Yep.
There are guys that can play and do circles around you.
Or even Nashville, for that matter.
100%.
You know,
100%.
I always joke around like Nashville. I'm a salesperson for a guitar manufacturer, as I told you earlier. Nashville used to be part of my territory, and I would walk down Broadway, and there'd be grannies in a muumuu that will smoke you on a telly, and like, wow, okay, I don't belong even drinking here, you know. So yeah, that's very true, and it's a very competitive thing, but obviously made your way through and navigated your way through all this, whether it be from sheer talent or networking or connections or what have you. And it brought you to where, you were able to have a solo career and still do all these other things and work on these other projects, and then get, go out on the road with Beck, multiple times, go out with Cheap Trick, go out with whoever it is that, work with Air, for however long you worked with them too. And, being that side man is a very valuable thing, and there's no shame in it either. Like,
No, and
if you don't care if your name's not out front, your bank account's getting full, and that's what matters at the end of the day.
And certainly for me, the artist, where I'm not the boss, I'm not the creative director, that I've worked with the most has been Beck. I've recorded so many records with him and endless touring, like you've said, and I'm still a fan. Which I was for years before that we got introduced and that actually happened, that connection happened. But I still feel like the forum that he provides, I don't have to be a session chameleon. I get to be me. My tastes are welcomed. Obviously he directs, he executive produce. And it doesn't always work. Well, and it would be silly if it did. It's impossible. But it's been an incredible environment to be a part of. And so here's a guy, where the trajectory did go like this and kept going like this. And his super far out, unique, unconventional pop styling somehow connected at a deeper and on a larger scale than, say, Jellyfish did. So it's been fun to be a part of that and see what these next levels are like. And to know that when he got his Grammy, that me and the other guys, because it was for a record called Morning Phase, and that was one of his records that he was intentionally doing a band album. Guys, I'm going to show up with the lyric and the chords, and I'm going to hand it off to you, and let's see what we all come up with together. I trust you to come up with your parts. I'm going to make comments, but it's organic that way. It's more of a band tradition, old world record making. And so it was fun to know that I was part of that family, No,
that's awesome.
Be recognized with that.
Did he, I'm not sure of the origins of how you guys got hooked up, but was he a fan of you? Was he a fan of Jellyfish? Is that what kind of got the wheels going for him to work with you?
As far as I know, in my brief conversations with him about it, he wasn't even aware of Jellyfish.
Okay.
He was aware of Moog Cookbook through some friends. I don't know if he knew our names or anything, but it had come across his radar. And if I'm not mistaken, when he had a falling out with his then keyboard player around the Odelay record, post Odelay, they were touring the album. Several people in his immediate environment, including Justin, his bass player, I think Robert, one of his engineers, threw my name out there, and it was like, Roger, he's one of the guys from the Moog Cookbook thing, and I think that was enough for him to like his ears to perk up. Sure, we should audition him. Let's do that. And that was supposed to be for a 3-week tour in Australia. His Odelay touring was coming to an end. They had 3 weeks to do in Australia. Had a falling out with this guy. There was time to rehearse. They brought me in. I had to learn. There was all these threes. I had to learn 33 songs in 3 days of rehearsal for a 3-week tour of Australia. Wow. And it was so high pressure, and I was like, whatever it takes. This guy needs to see me and experience me, because I believe I can complement what he wants to do. Because he was very clear he was more than a loser guy. He was not showing any signs of slowing down.
Yeah.
And if he was going to be a snowball that was barreling down the hill and just growing and growing, I wanted to be a part of that, whatever that might look like.
This has been the longest 3-week tour ever then.
Exactly. So the tour ends. Everybody's like, great job. Fantastic. Cool. Bye. I didn't know if I'd ever hear from him again. And about 2 months later, he made contact with me. Beck's going to go in the studio, put a new record together, and he's not going to do it with the Dust Brothers. So it's not just going to be him and the computer world that he was known for. He's going to do it with a bunch of musicians. And he wants you to come over to his house, and he's going to show you some ideas just to kind of see if it would work out. And I'm like, oh my God, okay. Because I didn't expect that. I thought he was going to do another computer record. And this was for the Mutations album. And I went over to his place, and he showed me some of these ideas, and he started saying things like, are you familiar with Scott Walker? Do you know who Serge Gainsbourg is? And all these kind of Euro 60s pop things. Well, thankfully, as I told you guys earlier, I had started discovering this stuff by exchanging videotapes. And then when you would tour Japan, Japan would reissue all these CDs. And so we'd buy all this stuff we'd never heard of. Like, because you'd hear it in the record stores, like, what's this going on? They'd be playing like Melody Nelson or some Serge Gainsbourg record from the 60s, or Franz Gall, Francois Hardy. There were so many artists, like, and people like Air were getting into these bands too. And Beck had just done a remix for Air. So he goes, oh, you know those guys? And I was like, well, yes, not only do I know them, thankfully they've reached out to Brian and I to do a remix, which was a freaking miracle. How did they know who Moog Cookbook was? But it turned out our distributor had some CDs in Europe. That's how they knew about it. Again, no internet. And they reached out to us. So he's like, well, that's really cool. You know who Air is. You know who Serge Gainsbourg is. So Roger can clearly play keyboards. It looks like he also gets the aesthetic that I want to put forth on this new album. And he started showing me, well, can you read these chords and stuff? I was like, yeah. And I'll never forget, at one point I played this, because I felt I had the opportunity to play this very kind of Serge Gainsbourg keyboard thing, because Serge was a keyboardist. So when he would arrange it, you could tell he thought like a keyboard player. And so I played this one little lick that was very kind of French. And I could tell Beck's ears perked up. And it was kind of like I kind of sealed the deal right then and there. Because he's like, I can trust Roger to navigate all this stuff I'm going to throw at him, because he was throwing like legit country songs at us, French pop, kind of Southern California sound, Laurel Canyon, singer-songwriter ideas. None of this had nothing to do with Odelay and Loser.
Yeah.
And on the one hand, I was like, yeah, I thought I knew who Beck was, but I was being pleasantly surprised. And he was the third or fourth artist post OK Computer to recruit Nigel Godrich. So Nigel was going to make this record with us.
Nice.
Anyway, so that's how that, off and on for 25-year relationship began. And I've always, if I can't be co-writing and realizing my own songs, I'll sure as hell be happy being a part of Beck World.
Yeah.
There's nothing more gratifying than realizing your own original ideas.
Yeah.
And I've played on so many incredible artist stuff. And frankly, I haven't necessarily been a fan of the music. I like doing session work because it's fun to work with the producer who presents like, Roger, we have a jigsaw puzzle to figure out, and I want you to be part of the jigsaw puzzle team. Great. You're my captain. Let's do it. And you kind of get used to, well, as a songwriter, that's a pretty mediocre idea. But what can I do as an arranger and a keyboard player to bring something, make it interesting if you think it's boring? What can I do? So that's why I like doing session work. And that's been really varied. But you have to develop humility, and you're not the guy writing the songs.
Yeah.
It's like, well, if we got to the chorus, I know what I would do. Yeah, but that's not what's happening here. So calm down, and you're wearing a different hat now, and that's been very healthy for me. And it's a skill set. You can't learn this in music school. It's on the job training.
Yeah.
And a lot of my success has been on the job. So that's what I was saying earlier. It's like, don't spend some of the most precious 4 years of your early musical life doing music. You can. There's things to gain from music school, but I can give you 3 things to do right now that are, they're way more immediate and way more going to get you to where you want to go. And I didn't invent anything. I'm just saying you want to put more eggs in this basket and not over here. That's all.
No, that makes a lot of sense. We're running a little short on time because you have a 9 o'clock curfew.
Oh yeah.
So, so I did want to touch on a couple of things really, really quick. And then there's been some questions that came in from the audience too. I do want to make sure that we ask a couple of those.
Okay. Well, we can go a little over 9. Go for it.
Oh, okay. Well, I did want to bring up the fact that you've had a long and storied solo career as well. And your first couple of albums that you released in the mid 2000s, looks like they were originally only released in Japan. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah.
So you must be big in Japan.
I had a few fun months and years in Japan for sure, including I had the world's greatest A&R person at a label, Pony Canyon Records, which was a pretty substantial label in Japan at the time. And she just worked to the ends of the earth for me. And it was kind of always understood, if we could get the infrastructure together, that I would come over and play some of the big clubs in Tokyo and Osaka and in that kind of medium market. Because even though I got played on Japanese radio, I'll never forget. I went over there, I did some radio promo, and I played live on the radio station. And they said, yes, this week your song is number 6. And I said, well, who's above me? And it was like, Janet Jackson beat you out this week. And I'm like, well, if someone's going to beat me out, I'm going to rub shoulders. That's, it's a hell of a compliment to have actually gotten up on number 6 next to Janet Jackson. So that was fun. But she goes, when you come over, I want to bring you over for Fuji Fest. And I go, well, yeah, but you're probably going to have me play in one of the side tents for 500 people or something. He goes, no, you play the 5,000 tent. I go, no, I don't have 5,000 fans in Japan. You're going to put me in this tent and we're all going to be disappointed that it's not filled up. She goes, I take care of everything. It will be just fine. We do press and promo and radio. You will have fans. I'm not worried about it. And I'm not trying to make fun of her. I'm just like, we were trying to communicate in her broken English because I didn't speak any Japanese. And I was a nervous wreck. And I came over. This was for Catnip Dynamite. And not only was the 5,000 tent filled up, there were people on the outside who had to look from the side. And Jason Faulkner was playing on a different night, and he came that night too. And I invited him on stage, and we did That Is Why together, which was fun.
Oh, wonderful.
So all this is to say, there were a few years, 2006, 7, 8, where I got to feel like a rock star in Japan. And it was amazing. I always say, if I don't care what size of band you are, if you can figure out a way to get to Japan, all your dreams will come true. Because even if you're the smallest band in the world, somebody over there knows about you, somebody cares about you, and you have rabid fans in Japan. Even if it's just 10 of them, those 10 fans will make you feel like you're a god. They'll wait in the lobby for you, and they'll draw little comics for you, and they'll buy gifts for you, and they will have memorized all your lyrics in broken English. And if you go play at a record store or at the world's tiniest club in Japan, those 10 fans will be screaming all of your lyrics in the front row to you. And you'll be like, my God, I've died and gone to heaven.
Nick, let's do this.
Yeah. And all the immense hard work that any band, big or small, has spent trying to make this happen, you will feel vindicated. You will feel appreciated. You'll feel like it was all worth it if you go have some kind of presence in Japan.
Wow, that's really, really cool. I still haven't been there even as a tourist. I couldn't even imagine as a musician.
Got to go to Tokyo for at least 1 week.
2 weeks.
Life will be changed. Yes.
So fast forwarding a little bit, because we want to make sure we fit most everything in. And of course we want to, once again, pimp out your most recent EP, Radio Daze and Glamping, by Roger Joseph Banning Jr., available on vinyl and CD and streaming services. But in between those albums and Radio Daze by Roger Joseph Banning Jr., there was the Lickerish Quartet. And that brings everything kind of full circle again
It was
with
TVIs too.
TVIs as well.
We skipped over TVIs
That's
We're
all
running
right.
out of time.
and the Logan Sanctuary record.
I only bring it up though for the Jellyfish fans because it not
Yeah,
only did it
'cause-
allow Jason Faulkner and I
Yep.
to work together again, but Brian Reitzel from Red Cross who rounded off the trio, and it was another really fun, couldn't believe it happened project, and it actually had some life in Japan because we couldn't get arrested in the U.S.
Great record.
Thank you, sir.
And then so TVIs happened again. That sprinkling of the jellyfishdom. Lickerish Quartet is a reuniting of the touring lineup of Spilt Milk.
Yeah.
It was you, and it was Eric Dover and Tim Smith playing bass. And then you had a drummer play as well.
Jeremy Stacy.
Jeremy Stacy. There you go.
Who we were all friendly with, and we said he's the perfect drummer.
And this was, I know you were putting it together sort of before COVID, but during COVID is when everything seemed to get released.
That's my memory. I heard, I feel like Lighthouse Spaceship came out like a day or two before the shutdown happened. That's what it feels like in hindsight. I don't know if that
correct.
timeline is it? Okay.
100% correct. It was both the most depressing news, and then somebody said, we kind of have a captive audience now.
Yeah.
People want to hear stuff, and they want to be entertained. So we had a 4-song EP for them. That started out as a writing project. Yeah. Lickerish Quartet started out as a writing project between me, Eric, and Tim, me and Tim initially, and he suggested we knock on Eric Dover's door. And really, although we'd all remained friendly and we had played on Tim Smith's project, the Uma Jets, way back in the 90s, it was kind of like we were all in our late 40s, early 50s, and it was like there's some unfinished business here. Because in Jellyfish, yes, we toured together, but everybody in that band wrote songs, and we knew each other wrote. We'd heard some of each other's song ideas, but we never got the chance to either with the three of us or with Andy write together to see what would have happened. That opportunity never presented itself. So it was partially like, hey, before another 10 years goes by, wouldn't it be fun to see if we could write some stuff together? We missed each other's companies and each other's artistic vision, and we related to each other as songwriters. So that's what that was all about, and we amassed some very solid ideas very quickly, and so then it just became obvious it would be a waste to not try to record these and capture these ideas, because we knew there'd be some Jellyfish fans scattered around the world who would probably be interested in hearing that. We were interested in hearing it. And even though it's like, well, you don't have a drummer. Well, but we knew that Jeremy would say yes if we reached out to him. We knew that he'd be.
Who wouldn't?
Well, we knew that he'd be perfect for this. And we'd all worked with him independently, and his personality and his drumming approach, we knew would be perfect, that he would get what we were going for. So we didn't have to worry about having that band member for that. So that's how that happened. And then we realized, like all of our projects, we'd bitten off so much. We had such high standards for all this material, and it was going to be time consuming. And it didn't help that Tim Smith lived all the way in Atlanta. Jeremy was in England. Oof. So we had to do this when everybody's schedules allowed. We knew that this wasn't going to be a money-making venture. We knew we didn't have the infrastructure to tour it, or it wasn't going to be. So it was really going to be an experiment in utilizing the internet marketplace. What that meant, how far could we take that? Because I had done a little bit of it with the solo stuff, but this was going to be like a big campaign. Like, how much can we take social media and so forth with this? So that was part of the experiment. So it made sense to put songs out in 4 chunks, 3 EPs of 4 songs each. So that's how that happened. And then kind of finishing, just as we were releasing one, we're trying to put the finishing touches on the other and set it up. It became like, if we weren't in COVID quarantine, I don't know that we could have actually gotten them out there in a timely fashion. We would have gotten them out there, but it might have been a 6-year window, trajectory. But we were all sending each other files and completing things long distance. Like, imagine trying to do those giant harmonies long distance. We would get on a call like this, talk about the ideas. I'd scribble out a bunch of the parts and arrangement, send it back to the guys. What do you think of this? Okay, you sing your part, send it back to me. I'll work on it with Ken, our engineer. And I mean, it was torture, but we believed in the material. So it was like, we've got to finish this. Like the perfect song was Snollygoster Goon. Okay, that song, when we presented it to each other, it was a pretty just straightforward kind of power pop, punky, melodic punky, like a la Supergrass kind of a song, right? It became, because we were doing all these experiments long distance, we couldn't be in the room being a band just bashing it out other than the initial tracking. It became this crazy collage of ideas. And I'm really happy with how it came out, but it was a direct result of being locked down in your personal studio and like trying to breathe some life into a very much a band song, you know, a garage band song, but we weren't in the garage together doing it.
Yeah.
You know, the one thing that I mean, apart from the fact that the music is amazing, and I'm not trying to reference other bands, but it's the closest thing to Jellyfish I think that I've heard from any of your other projects. And I don't mean that in a bad way.
No, for sure. I totally agree.
Yeah.
And that was, you know, obviously we kind of saw that unfolding, and we didn't have reservations about that. It's not like we weren't trying to do more of that or less of that. We have our golden rule. Every project I've ever been in, let the song dictate how it wants to be. If it wants to go over here into Mars, then allow it, at least conduct the experiment to take it to Mars. If it wants to be more traditional with a string quartet, a simple vocal and acoustic guitar, let it be that. Don't try to force any of that. And as songwriters, you start learning what that looks like.
Yeah.
So the song started unfolding, and then we kind of looked at each other and went, well, sure, it has this flavor to it. I'm sitting here with, you know, a huge chunk of Jellyfish.
Yeah. It's almost inevitable.
And it kind of doesn't matter that 25 years have passed.
Yeah.
We're still those youthful, pie in the sky, daydreaming, fantastical dreamers that allowed us to do that very off the beaten path music in the first place. You know, or unfashionable music in the first place.
What's yesterday's fashion is tomorrow's garbage, and then it comes back in being fashionable again. And when this came out, I was like, wow, because I didn't even know that it had happened. And a friend of mine told me, hey, did you know that the Jellyfish guys put out another song? I'm like, what? And I heard Lighthouse Spaceship. And I said, oh my God, this is amazing. And then we heard Fadoodle, and which is such like the cutest name for a song ever is Fadoodle. Cause it's just, I want to hug the name. Like it's, oh, Fadoodle.
It's Eric Dover being allowed to run unrestrained. He will surprise you every time.
Well, the one thing that I wanted to bring up was you mentioned Snollygoster Goon. And when I heard the name of the song, I'm like, are these guys writing out of a Dr. Seuss book? Then I realized that Snollygoster is a word. And I had never heard of it before, and I had to look up the definition. So for those of you that don't know what a snollygoster is, it is a shrewd, unprincipled person. So there you go. You learned something today beyond what Roger told you about, you know, how to just be awesome. So
I learned that when Eric Dover presented the lyric to me and Tim. He goes, I kind of have this idea. You guys are going to laugh, but I think there's something maybe to explore. And we're just like, dear God, you've done it again, because... anyway, yeah.
Now,
no, I remember when Lighthouse Spaceship came out, just like sending it to everyone, like, oh my God, like these three are together again, and not only together again, but knocking a fucking home run out of the park. Like it was just, it was the saving grace in that terrible time for sure.
For
Thank
sure.
you.
It was definitely a harbor in the tempest, if you will, especially with music, because nobody knew what was happening. right? In general, if you think about the general mindset of the world, not just this country, but the world. And at least there was this sort of beacon that's like, yeah, there's hope. We'll get past this. There's still things being created. You can enjoy music. You're allowed. It's fine. And it helped, or at least it helped me. And I'm sure it helped thousands of others. Because if you look at the views on Facebook, you're talking 70,000 views on some of these songs. I mean, that's fantastic. Quick aside, there's something called the snallygaster. I don't know if you know that, but that's a thing. It is in American folklore. The snallygaster is a bird reptile chimera originating with the superstitions of early German immigrants. So you could do snallygaster goon if you wanted to do a follow up with everyone, and or just be smart and be like, look, Eric, look what I learned today. So thank you for just continuing to make music and giving us all that hope that, you know, good music still exists, right? You know, we, like you mentioned before, like how some people were really kind of, you know, putting down like a Madonna or Prince or whatever. But the thing is, like, the amount of musicianship that went into actually creating that is actually super high musicianship. You and your groups and your crews that you work with continuously remind us that there is something else out there to help you expand your horizons and look deeper into something else. That's the way I truly feel about it. So just keep doing this.
Thank you, sir.
Like, over and over and over again. Oh, by the way, his most recent EP is Radio Daze. I don't know if I mentioned, but you should buy this. Nick, do you have this in your store?
I do. Of course I do.
Oh, so then you could buy it from Nick. And he will ship
buy
it out
from Roger directly.
You could buy it. Now, that is something I do want to touch on before we get to questions from the audience. If you go on Roger's website, which, by the way, I do have it right here as a banner. We could do this. There you go. Roger Joseph Manning Jr. official.com.
Yep.
You have fan experiences on there that are available.
100%. I still do
that is freaking amazing. You could like, one of the experiences is you can go record shopping with Roger, and he could, you know, walk around LA with him. He'll take you to the best shops, and you got to buy the records. He's not buying them for you, but you know, he'll show you what to buy. But like, if you want to collaborate with Roger on a song, he'll do, like, all these experiences are available. And I think that that's fantastic, because it's more than just Roger played on my song or Roger helped me write a song. It's the knowledge you take from that you were talking about tonight, the culmination of your experiences. And the fact that you're continuing to do it is absolutely fantastic. So just tell us a little bit about, you know, what rewards you get from it personally by doing things like that.
Well, I certainly get to meet a wide variety of people, but and different music makers from around the world. We started doing that heavily with Lickerish Quartet, and there are guys, artists, and bands that hired us to do some singing or played keyboards, whatever. And some of these relationships have continued, right? It started as like a fan purchase, but now I've played on other people's stuff from back then. They've come back to me because, hey, we're working on our third record. Can we hire you for 2 songs on keyboard? Sure. Let's work out a fee and send me out the files. Tell me what you want, and we'll, you know, I just put it into the list of things I have to do today. And but I'm very thankful for those relationships and people that I played on a wide variety of stuff because of this, and it's just I'm very thankful for the work opportunities, needless to say. But like I said, just it's been a really cool way to get kind of deeper with the fan base, and it's a fan base that, you know, we so don't take for granted. It's like they're going to be there if I can ever get another solo EP out or whatever, and it's just been super cool.
Well, remember, if you're interested, go to Roger Joseph Manning Jr. official.com, and you can see the and it's not like 2 or 3 different experiences.
Oh, there's like 10 options.
Yeah, there's a ton of different.
Yeah, there's a bunch of
side.
I mean, I give music lessons. I mean, all kinds of stuff. Most of what people have reached out for is to help them with a recording, an original recording they're working on. But we've done songwriting with people, lots of singing on people's projects, all over the map, and people with all kinds of different budgets and all different levels of success and so forth.
Well, let's see. Now, let's get into some of these questions here. One question that I'll answer really quick. Did I name Roger after this Roger? The answer is no. So that's off the
You
books.
didn't? Well, why
I'm
not?
sorry. I didn't know you then. I knew of you, and I felt that might be a little bit, maybe it's really true, and I just don't want to tell you because I don't want you to send, an order of protection. This question, please ask Roger if he was at all influenced by the mighty John Douglas Lord.
As in John Lord from Deep Purple?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's who
I
he
didn't know
means.
his middle name was Douglas.
I didn't know either until today.
John Lord's a good example, and Deep Purple in general is a good example of a band I got into very late. Obviously, when I grew up, they were all over the radio with Smoke on the Water and a handful of other songs. But of all the British like blues rock that came across my desktop, so to speak, I was least fascinated by them. They were a little kind of bonehead for me. Same with AC/DC. AC/DC is one of my favorite bands of all time now. But when AC/DC was in their heyday, it was too like kind of jock and dumbed down for me. Like I needed to have more like brain food. But the AC/DC rhythm section, and I mean, AC/DC's rhythm section is one of the best rock rhythm sections in the history of rock to me.
Yes.
I appreciate them on a whole new level. They're in, Bon Scott through the second phase with Mutt Lange and all that. John Lord, I later discovered what a brilliant keyboard player he was, in that they could have just kicked him out and brought in another guitar player because they were a guitar riff rock band. But John Lord co-founded the group, and a lot of their vision was because of him. And I came to understand the role certainly the distorted Hammond organ played in that ensemble, and came to appreciate over the years his unique style and contribution to that genre. And he's definitely an influence. He's definitely one of the greats, and I'm only sorry I discovered them so late.
This
Great
next one is more of a statement than anything else, but I agree with it. We need audiophile Jellyfish vinyl big time. I just saying. Let's see. This one, also from Lorenzo. What or who is the man I used to be about?
I don't officially know because Andy wrote that lyric, as he did all the lyrics for the Jellyfish Daze. It can be, I like the character and that song being what it's about because it can apply to so many different families and environments and situations and relationships, father, son, and that dynamic. It has a great universality about it.
Sure.
And so, sorry, I don't. You'd have to contact Andy if he ever wanted to reveal what's behind that tune.
Do you have his number? We'll call.
Yeah.
You know what, Nick has a bunch of questions that have come from past guests on the show.
I got a couple fan ones too. The first one, Roger, I wanted to ask you, which you've probably been asked a gazillion times, but I'm going to frame it a little bit different, that this came from a fan. Is it true Jellyfish was asked to reunite for Coachella a few years back? And if so, how close did that come to happening?
I only know bits and pieces about this through Imperial Drag's old manager. He and I stayed in touch, and somewhere around 2006 or something, he mentioned something to me about an offer had come in for Coachella, as they were doing with a lot of bands, reunite as a special Coachella event. We'll give you this big pile of cash or whatever. So I had heard that was presented. I don't know what band members knew about that or not. I knew that Jason and I had become aware of it because Jason had actually worked with this manager as well, but it never got to any other phase. It's almost like I don't even know if it would have happened or not because nobody was there was nobody pioneering it. There wasn't one lead voice like an attorney or a former manager or one band member calling everybody up and going, hey, this has been offered to us. I know we haven't been in each other's lives, but is this something that would make sense? It never got to that stage. So it literally was just a rumor.
Got it.
I don't even know. It never got even to that point for me to decide, well, what would I do in this situation? Like,
It was just, it was hearsay.
basically.
Okay. This is a question from our mutual friend Butch Walker.
Oh,
he said, was there any MIDI instruments used on Spilt Milk, or was it all analog instruments?
Well, so we always had samplers handy, because samplers and keyboards like the M1 that used, PCM samples was how we did our demos, right? We didn't have a French horn section, so we'd pull up the best French horn sample and record the part. Now, that was always with the assumption that we were going to be able to hire the actual musician and the actual instrument to come back in. But one of the things that happened, and will be no surprise to Butch, is that there were occasional times where there was charm to the kind of mediocre sample and the way that we performed it. For example, on He's My Best Friend, there's clarinets that come in the B section, and we used clarinet samples. They were so quirky and kind of clumsy and cute and whimsical that everybody, like our producers, Jack, us, we all kind of realized this is charming. We don't need to pay somebody to come in and replace it with the real thing, because we're going to lose the charm. That was the exception, though. Most of the time, we brought in human beings, tried to impress upon them what the attitude should be for this part, and then, cross your fingers, hopefully they get it. And sometimes, and what would often happen is you'd get something unexpected that you wouldn't, there's no way you could have thought it could have been like that, but their personality started shaping it a different way. Or they said, I could also play it like this, and I could add this final note to the end of the phrase. Oh, that's cool. Let's capture that once.
Amazing. Here's one we ask every guest on this show, and I couldn't believe somebody commented it to ask you, Roger, but David Lee Roth or Sammy Hagar Van Halen?
Diamond Dave, 100% forever
Yes.
and ever and ever.
Yes. What's your feelings on the song Dreams?
By Fleetwood Mac?
No. Van Halen.
I actually don't. Is that an OG Van Halen or
No,
Sammy
that's
Van-
a
Sammy Van Halen.
I literally don't know any Van Halen starting with 5440 or whatever, or any off the tongue of knowledge. Van Halen, to me, first album through 1984. Obviously, I have my favorite moments and moments I like left. Van Halen, to me, to this day, is one of the greatest American rock bands. Period.
Yes,
They're brilliant. And it's not. They're such a great band because they meet all the criteria, much you might say that the Beatles did. In that, out of the gate, the songwriting is pure pop gold. Just the songs are so strong. Now, then you bring in the personalities. Got Eddie's amazing personality, DLR's, Diamond Dave's gigantic personality.
Yeah.
The guy that nobody thinks is doing anything over there on bass, who's singing all the killer top harmonies. That's just gold. It's just power pop hook gold. And then, of course, Alex has his drum style that's very unique to him.
Another amazing rhythm section too.
Yeah.
Oh my God. It's everything, right? This is what you all go for. And you hope it hits somewhere close to the genius of Van Halen as like a model.
No doubt. Absolutely. Last one I have, Mike, and then I don't know if you want to wrap it up.
Well, I just want to say, I want to footnote, much to my surprise, obviously you're in a band like Beck's band where members come and go. At times that band has been 11 people strong, but the core people in that band who've been around the longest, one of the places we have bonded on, because we disagree on plenty, and as much as we do share in common to make those records together, we disagree on plenty. Van Halen is a common area where we bond and
Nice.
worship. And
Van
it should
Halen
be.
can bring everyone together.
it's
Yes.
so funny to watch some of these guys who are like, you think all they listen to is like the golden era of like British Anglo early 80s, art rock. And there's like, no, but Van Halen's the best.
That's right. Totally.
Nice.
So great. Do you have any communication with Andy in general, or specifically regarding any of the reissues or products that have been released under the Jellyfish name in the last 10 to 15 years?
Yeah, we have, most of my contact with him has been business related. So we absolutely touch base when there's decisions to be made about Jellyfish legacy and, like you said, projects that are being put together.
Cool. That's good to hear that you guys do approve this stuff.
Mm-hmm. I mean, yes, there are things that slip through the cracks, but thankfully our attorneys and business people reach out to us for some kind of approval.
Nice.
I have one question, and then we have a very short segment, and then we're going to cut you loose.
Okay.
I want to know why Tom Hanks is the picture for Roger Joseph Manning Jr. if you search on mobile for your Wikipedia entry. I don't understand this.
You're the first person to show that to me. I know nothing about that. I've never seen it. There's also some children's, I think it's a video game that was popular and they turned it into a movie. God, I'm not sure. But a lot of the youngsters have grown up with it in the last 10 years. I forget the name of the show, but there's a character on it. His name is Foxy something, and he's like a fox. It's one of the characters, animated. Mm-hmm. And according to the credits, I'm the voiceover for the fox.
Okay.
I've never even seen an episode of this show. And so there's people out there who are like, oh, well, that's how he pays his bills. He does voiceover work.
Like using your full Roger Joseph Manning Jr. name? Yep. All right. Now, if there's two of you out there beyond right. Roger Manning that we've already right. discussed, now it's weird.
No, it's a total mystery. There's some logical answer, but yeah, there's some answer to how Tom Hanks became my picture for the. Who the hell knows? That's.
Well, really quick. Actually, I do have one more very quick question. If you had to recommend one band that you are currently listening to in heavy rotation for people to check out, who might it be?
I really don't know, but I will say this just to blow everybody's heads off, or some people might not be surprised. I've known about the British artist Charlie XCX for years. Very much a youth culture star. In fact, I worked for a producer named Ariel Reichstad who was doing a remix for her, and he had me play on her stuff. But I don't follow her. I wasn't paying attention to her career. Often, and I know I sound like an old fart. Hey, you kids, get off my grass. A lot of that music comes on the air, and it just all sounds the same to me. And I don't. They're speaking a language that I simply don't relate to. It's not even like I like it or hate it. I just don't know what language they're speaking. And that teen culture has always been that way. That's fine. But recently, another producer had me play on a very pop project. He's a young producer, does a lot of pop writing and producing. And he gave me new Charlie XCX songs from her latest record, it's about 6 months old, to listen to as reference for synth sounds and the kind of synthesizer parts he wants. I'm like, okay, whatever, I'll check it out. I'm hooked now. There's 2 to 3 songs on her new record. I'm like, man, this is tough. It's kind of like punk, but with keyboards. And she's just like taking no prisoner. And then I check out the video, and the video is totally, it's really like, it's almost comedic, but like performance art. And the whole thing takes place in an airport, and it's not her just like being a fashion model at the airport. It's her like getting stuck in the elevator, and it's her like one of those cleaning carts that comes by that cleans the floor of the airport. It like runs her over, and so she's being dragged across the floor, and then she's out on the wing of a plane and she falls off, and you think, oh my god, she's falling off the wing, she's gonna die. No, she just falls into the luggage cart, and the luggage cart is taken. But it's not humorous. It's not being presented as like gags. It's just she's still like, oh, no, just like anyway, I really liked hearing the keyboards. It's riff rock. It's riff rock. Instead of a fuzzy guitar, it's fuzzy synths. And it's so infected. It's very dumb and simple and highly repetitive, even more so than a lot of that music, in the way the Ramones were. So for me, in my generation, I hear it, and to me, it just sounds like, oh, this is female Ramones.
Nice.
That's what it sounds like to me. So I did. It totally got under my skin in the best sense of the word. And so people are like, what are you listening to lately? I was like, I can't get this song out of my head.
Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Check out Charlie XCX.
I think the song it's called Von Dutch is the particular single I'm thinking of. But I went on there, and there's several other songs like that. So I'm like, I don't know, modern music. The shit's kind of cool to me. What she's doing here with her team. So
Love that.
Okay, last thing, we have a very short segment called Discovered, which is why this show is called Cover to Covered. And basically, we discuss at short length a cover song that we like as much or more than the original version. And
Right.
every episode Nick and I come up with one. I'm going to be a total homer this time, 100%.
a what? You're gonna be what?
A homer,
Okay.
meaning rooting for the home team, which is you. And that is, for me, you could find it, you could find covers of it. I know at least part of it is on the When These Memories Fade box set singles, but your split where you do Jet into No Matter What from back in the day.
You took mine.
Oh, ha ha! I went first. But yeah, that's totally killer. And if you haven't seen it, it's on YouTube. There are videos of it on YouTube. If you could find the When These Memories Fade box set, grab it. I grabbed one of the first ones. I actually have the colored vinyl one, which makes me very happy. But yeah, that would be my pick for this week, paying tribute to our guest, Roger, of course.
Do you have to say one, Nick?
Well, now I'm going to say the Jellyfish Baby Come Back, Baby's Coming Back. When you guys do Player Baby Come Back, the
that.
first half of it.
I was trying to think of what the hell you were referencing. Wow. There have been a surprising amount of good ones, and I know I'm not thinking of all of them, but I've always loved Susie and the Banshees cover of Dear Prudence.
Oh, wow.
Because
that one has not been used.
I really love, because to me covers are like, if you don't make it your own, what's the point? And obviously that's really hard to do, particularly with a song that has already had success and is so entrenched in the subconscious of the culture, because you're about to rip that away and throw it on its head, and still have people like, I always liked Talking Heads' Take Me to the River.
It's a great one too. Yeah.
That one they very much made their own.
Yeah. And I've always loved Elton's version of Lucy in the Sky.
Great version. Yep. I like his version of Pinball Wizard too, to be honest with you.
Totally. And I know there's like 20 other genius ones that don't come to mind, but
oh yeah. And that's the problem, because there are so many great ones that sometimes we're caught between, we've already named a ton of great ones and oh my God, I can't think of the next one because there's so many others to choose from.
Well, I'll leave you with this on this subject. My former partner, Charlotte, this was her concept, but I couldn't agree with it more, so I'll use it. She was the one that we amassed that wonderful record collection together. But she always used to say, people ask her, are you a Dylan fan? She goes, I am if somebody else covers his song. Because she was one of those people, and understandably so, who it was always hard for her to get past his vocal style, and his style was always also very minimal, right? But people, and God, there've been so many covers of his catalog. It's kind of crazy, and people would often, because you could see, it was like, oh, he was singing a melody, but in his style, it was sometimes sounding like it was speaking a lot, like he was speak singing, which is a style too, obviously. But there other artists would cover his songs and they just kind of smooth out the lines, and wow, that's a really lyrical melody. So I loved hearing like the Byrds cover Bob Dylan songs. Yeah, to the point where it's like, you sure the Byrds it's not their original,
Right.
And there's a lot of that in the '60s that happens. Groups are covering each other's songs sometimes within months of the song being a hit by one artist. So I love playing that game and going back to the '60s and discovering who's covering what of each
Yeah,
other's.
we actually had a show that we did just on covers, and like you didn't know that this song was a cover, and we would talk about all these things. You're like, well, no, that's the original. No, it's not.
Right.
You know, from something as well known as like the Arrows. I Love Rock and Roll, done by Joan Jett, but of course Joan Jett's
Yeah.
version is like immense. You know, things like that, but also like Respect by Aretha Franklin.
Yeah.
You know, and
Or
tons of others.
Ace Frehley's cover of Back in the New York Groove.
Yes,
Which is
right.
definitely better than the original.
It's
No offense to the
freaking
original.
great. The original is
so
great
good.
too. I
Yes.
like Ace's version better.
Yes. And that's why Ace's solo album was the best one of the four.
It was the best one.
All right. Well, with that, we're going to play the jingle here.
The Paul one's not far behind.
No, it's not. Yes, it is. It's far, far away. All right. Roger, thank you so much for being here with us today. This
Thanks,
was
guys.
another exciting episode of Cover to Covered with Roger Joseph Manning Jr. Round of applause.
Yes.
Really appreciate the airtime to not only talk to you guys, but connect with the fans. I know they love these moments, as I
And
do.
a lot of them hung out this whole time.
That's great.
So thank you for everybody who was watching. Nick, thank you again. What store do you own?
Rock City Music Company.
Where are you located?
5 Mile in Farmington in Livonia,
You
Michigan.
had to think about that.
I did.
Okay. And where can we find you?
RockCityMusicCo.com and all social media platforms.
And you could buy all of Roger's stuff through either you or through Roger, Roger Joseph Manning Jr. official.com. Make sure you do it. Support the artist. That is the most important thing because, look, we love the music. We can hear it over and over and over again. If you buy your own, you can listen to it forever.
Yep.
So buy it. Get it in your collection. Thanks, everybody.